Chapter 31, Back to the Tower. Chapter text, Chapter Roman 24, Back to the Tower. Taija returned to true consciousness a couple of days after the Battle of Falme, feeling like death warmed up. Tentatively reaching for the comfort of Sedar produced an agonizing spike of pain in her head, and she quickly withdrew. It didn't matter. That pain told her what was important. She hadn't burnt herself out. Thinking back to that last desperate fight, spinning balefire at figures fighting in the air, Taija winced. Madness, especially at the end. She was very lucky she hadn't killed herself, although she couldn't help but wonder whether that would have been the worst outcome. At some point, Taija was moved to her own room as Falme's civic buildings were taken over, and over the next few days, she slowly recovered. Moiraine seemed to have popped up just late enough to be completely useless. Perhaps that was unfair. She did heal her, but Taija couldn't help thinking about how a woman of her strength with her angreal would have been more than useful. Maybe enough that she could have intervened in Rand's fight before he so stupidly let Ishamael stab him. Then again, given the performance of these modern Aes Sedai, she might just have gotten herself and Taija killed. Moiraine seemed determined to take advantage of Taija's bedridden condition, visiting her regularly. Every time she did it was exhausting. The woman's words had so many layers of meaning behind them. Her cool composure irritated Taija, and the probing questions combined with what seemed to be veiled commands exhausted her. Every time she saw Moiraine's serene, aloof face, it reminded Taija of everything that was wrong with the Aes Sedai. The ruins of the greatest organization of her time, being squatted in by half-drained children with a superiority complex. Her feelings weren't helped by the vulnerability that she was very conscious of while she was unable to channel. What if Moiraine knew how to use compulsion? Verin also visited a couple of times, absent-minded as she was. One time she had the girls in tow and told Taija they were planning to leave for the tower. Ridiculous. Taija told her not to worry. She'd get the three of them back safely as soon as she could channel again. No point in spending a month trudging around on horseback. Thankfully, Verin seemed to forget Taija existed after that. Elaine told her she'd apparently developed an interest in Falme's architecture, sending her warder off to do sketches. Alexei was a mercy. He spent hours sitting in Taija's room, talking with her about what both of them had been doing and updating her on what was happening with the rest of the group. Taija had to give him the edited version, with a promise that she'd tell him everything once she could ward the room, but it was enough. He was non-judgmental and kind, and she was ashamed that she'd ever considered leaving him behind in her earlier days in this time. Alexei's biggest worry seemed to be Taija herself. He certainly had no fear of Aes Sedai when he told her that she was pushing herself too hard and was going to end up killing herself. It had been a while since someone in their early 20s had called her an idiot, but her account of the end of the Battle of Falme probably did deserve that. Also seemed to have no fear of Aes Sedai when he shooed Moiraine out of Taija's room. In fact, she was fairly sure he'd started guarding her door at night. He really was taking too much influence from the Sheenarans. Taija's other pleasure was visits from the girls, mainly Elaine and Egwene, but occasionally Nynaeve too. She could see the signs of deep trauma hovering below the surface in Egwene and Nynaeve, but she never knew what to say, so she just tried to talk to them. Really, they needed proper counseling, therapy. But Taija strongly suspected that was something that no longer existed, and she had no idea how to start with it herself. Ironically, while she'd been worrying about the girls, it seemed like they were worrying about her. She didn't know how it happened, but at one point Egwene and Elaine just moved into her bedroom, insisting they were going to protect her until she was better. It was ridiculous. Heartwarming, but ridiculous. All her protests were ignored, though, so eventually Taija had no choice but to give in and accept them fussing over her. It took a week before Taija was properly out of bed and able to safely embrace Sedar again. She still felt like a woman of 700 rather than a not even middle-aged 180, or was it 181 now? Perhaps it was 3181, the oldest person alive. Other than the Forsaken, she supposed. 10th oldest, perhaps. She tried to remember whether any of them were younger than she was. Taija had already decided during her time in bed that she was going to help Rand rather than stay in the White Tower. Siwon clearly had matters in hand, and she was largely useless anyway. In her heart, she had the self-awareness to realize that it was also bad for her being in the tower. Every day she was reminded of everything that had been lost, and of how much she disliked the way the women claiming to be Aes Sedai in this time behaved. Taija gave herself a shake. It wasn't the time for introspection. Rand was awake, but not very mobile yet. She had time to take the girls back, give Siwan an update, and then be back in Falme before Rand could do much more than stare at the ceiling while that Min girl mooned over him. Had anyone given him the talk? How did this kind of society even deal with that kind of thing? Hopefully they had contraception. Maybe Lan could, or Alexei. After a number of goodbyes, the girls were finally ready to leave, and Taija spun a gateway to outside Tar Valon, inverted as ever. Traveling was one secret she was in no hurry to spread. After she emerged, she quickly disguised herself once more as the Lady Elfreda. Hopefully, it was the last day she'd ever have to do that. It took them a couple of hours on horses to reach the city's gates. There were more guardsmen than Taija remembered, but it was still a beautiful city. She was reminded of that riding through the streets while she briefed the girls. Look, we can't arrive together. It would be suspicious, and I have my own business to attend to. I'll keep an eye on you up to the tower grounds where you'll be safe, but I'm going to come in later. They responded with nods, and yes, Taija said I. You also need to remember to be careful what you say. You'll probably be thought of as runaways, maybe punished. Don't try to deny it until you speak to Siwan, the Amulin. She knows the truth, but it would be dangerous for you to say anything to anyone else. We can speak again later, before I leave. Now off you go. Taija reined back her horse and watched them head off ahead of her towards the tower. She'd follow at a suitable distance until they actually entered it, then spend an hour or two wandering around the city before she entered the tower by a different gate. Light. She hoped they didn't say anything stupid when they got there. After 2 hours spent riding around the city, torn between boredom and enjoyment of its beauty, it was time for Taija to head to the tower. Finding an alleyway without witnesses, she spun a gateway to the Amulin's bedchamber, only to see it fizzle in a flash of sparks. That was concerning. Had Siwan figured out how to ward against traveling? Taija supposed it was possible. The trick wasn't that difficult if you knew how to travel and understood wards. Still, given she couldn't travel, she had to get to the tower the slow way. At the gate, she was greeted by one of the guardsmen. Denim, she thought. Lady Elfreda, you're well. I had feared. He trailed off. She gave him a confused look. Of course I'm well, but thank you for your concern. There was clearly something odd going on, and her absence had been noticed. Obviously, there wasn't an order for her arrest or anything like that, but Taija drew a bit deeper on Sedar nevertheless. She rode on. There seemed to be more armed men around than before. Warders and tower guard both. The worry that had started to flutter in her stomach when her gateway failed was steadily growing. At the stables, Taija quickly arranged for her horse to be stabled and her bag to be delivered to her room before she continued on. There was nothing in the bag that she couldn't afford to lose if she needed to make a quick exit. There were a couple of places where Taija would swear the walls had recently been repainted. People seemed to be moving around with their eyes down, more jerky and awkward than she remembered. Something was wrong. Needed to get into the tower proper and find a way to contact Siwan as soon as possible. Or failing her, perhaps Angia or Megan. It might look less odd than demanding to speak to the Amulin. Taija walked through the inner gate, trying to look relaxed, but practically vibrating with internal tension. Her eyes were roaming left and right, scanning for any threat. Her plans to get in, get out, and go back to Rand had been forgotten, and the ecstasy of Sedar flowed through her as she held it at her full capacity. In the inner courtyard, she came to a stop. It wasn't as busy as usual, but there were still people around. No one she immediately recognized, though. She looked up along the buttressing above the tower's main doors, towards the windows. Wait. Taija's eyes flicked back to the main doors. That was. Her mind ground to a stuttering halt as she processed what she was seeing. A head, coppery skin framed by dark hair, impaled on a spike over the doors. Eyes staring sightlessly out of her ageless face. That couldn't be Lean. It couldn't be, but it was. Taija's mind was whirling. What did this mean? Had the Black Adger taken the tower? Where was Siwan? She needed to leave now. But she also needed to get the girls out. She just delivered them to the tower, straight from the abomination that was the Sintian into the hands of the Blacks. Run, fight, stealth. Was this her fault? If she'd been a bit more discreet, would Lean still be alive? Taija didn't know how long she stood there staring, torn by indecision, frozen by shock. She'd clashed with Siyun, but Lean was always the peacemaker. The river of Sedar hurtled through her, spikes of joyous pain stabbing at her, right at the limit of what she could hold even with an angriel. Then she felt a gentle hand on her arm. Taija wrenched herself round, spinning inverted fire, earth, and a touch of spirit. Just before she threw it, she released the web, feeling it fade away. Benny had a concerned smile on her face. "Alfreda, darling, you're back. I'd worried about you. It is good to see you unharmed, my dear." Aye, it's good to see you too, Benny," she managed to stammer. Benny glanced up at Lean's head and clucked her tongue. "Yes, I can see why that would upset you, my dear." Her smile faded, replaced with a sympathetic look. "A terrible business that, a horrible sight too. I cannot say I agree with that kind of display." She looked back to Taija. "You must be so discombobulated, you poor thing. Come along, let me get you some tea. Everything will feel better after a cup of hot tea." Before Taija knew it, she was being hustled into the tower and up some stairs while Benny fussed over her. She protested. She needed to get to the girls. "Honestly, Benny, I'm fine. I was just surprised, that's all." "Nonsense, young lady. Sights like that will distress anybody. Now, are you hurt? Did anything happen to you? You are looking a bit worn." Her hands patted all over Taija's arms, ignoring her half-hearted efforts to try to fend them off. In no time at all, she was gently pushing Taija into her rooms. Taija realized she'd never seen them before, but her reception room was quite luxurious in a comfortable way. Of course, the walls were covered in bookshelves, and she had a large, very untidy desk with more stacks of papers around it. But she also had thick, intricately decorated rugs warming the floor and some very comfortable-looking armchairs. Taija would have protested more, but she was still in shock, and Benny was surprisingly difficult to deny when she was in full-on mothering mode. That was probably why she was so often assigned to teach novices. Taija was quickly deposited in one of the armchairs. It really was very comfortable. "So did you enjoy your trip out of the tower, my dear? It truly was fortuitous timing for you, avoiding all that unpleasant business." Taija saw the light of Sedar spring up around Benny as she heated a teapot with a simple flow of fire, bustling around at the back of the room. The vaguely positive noises she made in response seemed to be enough for Benny to keep talking. "Of course, it's all safe again now, and I have missed our little talks, so I really am delighted that you're back again." Taija needed to be taking action, not stopping for tea with Benny, but she couldn't think of a polite or convincing excuse to extricate herself, and it was nice seeing her again, even if she did occasionally seem to lapse into treating her like a surrogate granddaughter. Eventually she finished whatever she was doing over there and came back with 2 steaming cups of tea. "Here you go, my dear," she handed Taija one. Taija sat there blowing on the hot drink. If she was honest with herself, she needed this. Essentially, the only company she'd had for the last week was corpses, traumatized teenagers, and Warren trying to trick her into light knows what. She didn't have time for it, but when she had no choice. Taija gave Benny a tremulous smile and a genuine "thank you" before taking a sip. It was as good as she'd hoped, and she took another bigger one with a sigh. Benny paused with a kind smile. "So you got everything you wanted to out of your trip, my dear?" Taija nodded. "I suppose so. Nothing ever goes perfectly, but I was able to meet the people I needed to, and it may even do some good in the longer run." "Well, I am glad to hear that." She leant forward and smileyed conspiratorially. "You'll be excited to hear that I have been speaking to one of my brown sisters, and I have an absolutely fascinating new book on the great cities of the Age of Legends. I am very much looking forward to discussing it with you." Her enthusiasm was infectious, but Taija had to let her friend down gently. "That will be lovely, Benny, but I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave the tower again shortly. I can't stay for long at all. You know, with things how they are back home," she trailed off. Benny nodded understandingly and patted her on the leg. "Yes, over in Western Andor, is it not?" Of course, she already knew that. Then the dim light of Sedar sprang up around her, and she started to spin a web against eavesdropping. Within a fraction of a second of seeing the lights spring up around her, Taija had opened herself to Sedar, already spinning, except there was nothing. The light of Sedar was still there, but it felt like water slipping through her fingers. In fact, her fingers didn't really want to move either. She tried again and again. Each time there was nothing. In fact, even the light felt more distant, unlike the panic that was roaring up inside her. She looked back at Benny, who suddenly looked much less absently mindedly motherly than normal. Taija had her full attention now, and she could feel it. Benny took a sip of her own tea. Honestly, what a pickle you've got yourself in, Alfreda, my dear. Despite the sharp focus in Benny's eyes, her tone was still kind, gentle. Or should I call you Taija? How did you know? Taija stammered, cursing internally. She gave a small, self-satisfied nod. I did not until you just told me. Well, fuck. Taija tried to get up from her chair and failed. At the same time, she felt the air harden around her. Fear spiked within her. Had she just delivered herself straight to the Black Adger? Benny looked her up and down and hummed to herself, her tone musing. Is the tea working? Yes, I do suspect we would both know if it was not. Now, if the tea is working, then that must mean you can channel, yes. She didn't wait for an answer, so you must have some clever little way of hiding it. What would it be? Taija wasn't sure if she was toying with her or genuinely musing, but Benny just smiled at her furious glare. Yes, a way of hiding a weave, but just because I cannot see it does not mean it is not there. Taija could barely see the light of Sedar around Benny anymore, let alone her flows, but she felt the cold shiver when her concealing webs were sliced, and her appearance rippled. Benny's eyebrows rose almost to her hairline. Oh my, you are a strong one. Such a lovely young lady, too. I am glad for the tea, my dear. Otherwise I suspect I might be in a pickle of my own. Still, I might just. Yes, I am going to add a shield on top, just because, well, she trailed off as if she'd lost her train of thought. Taija wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Normally she could shatter her shield with a fraction of her strength, and now she was sat there trussed up like a bird for the roast, while Benny happily mused to herself about her predicament. Alfreda dear, or I suppose I should call you Taija now, I would love it if we could have a more honest talk. I really would be fascinated to know where you are really from. Taija was having to suppress a full-on panic. Maybe if she could keep her talking for long enough, the tea would wear off before she handed her over to whoever she was working for. Elada, the Black Adger, the Forsaken. All she needed was long enough to channel again, and she'd be safe. She could tear down the anti-traveling wards in a couple of minutes. It would be very obvious, but there'd be nothing to stop her escaping then. Taija took a breath, speaking slowly, trying not to slur through the heavy dullness of the tea. The truth, all right. I'm sorry I lied to you, Benny, but I've been asked, no ordered, to keep it a secret. I'm from across the Arith Ocean. I came here on behalf of the Aes Sedai there too. Taija dear. Her smile was as gentle as her tone. The truth, please. Fine. Taija grimaced. The truth is that I've been working for the Amulin as a secret operative outside the bounds of the tower. I've been hunting enemies of the tower for her, and Benny cut her off again. That one is even less plausible than the last, Taija dear. I do have plenty of time, though, so if you would like to try again. Benny already knew more than enough, and seemed to be able to see straight through her. If she knew this much, telling her the truth might at least keep her talking, if she even belied it. The truth is, I was born over 3,000 years ago in a city named Adanza. Benny just gave her an encouraging smile. I grew up, lived, worked in what you people now call the Age of Legends. I saw the collapse. I fought in the War of Power, and somehow I ended up here in what you call the Third Age. Taija looked defiantly at her. Benny cocked her head. There, that was not so hard, was it? And you are not a dark friend. She didn't wait for an answer. No, of course you are not. Second later, the light of Sedar winked out from around her. The shield over Taija unraveled, and she felt the bonds of air vanish. Taija stared at her wide-eyed, speechless as she prattled on. I'm ever so glad we could clear that up. In fact, I am very excited. You had so many absolutely fascinating nuggets of knowledge, even when you were pretending to be Alfreda. I have so many questions. She seemed to shiver with excitement. What? Taija finally managed to get the words out. You drug me, shield me, and then just let me go. Just like that. Why? She struggled to keep her voice under control. Benny looked confused by her question. Oh, well, it is quite simple. Because I like you, my dear, but you really cannot lie for toffee. Now I hope you can forgive me for this little adventure. She gestured vaguely around the room. I just had to be sure, and now, well, if you should choose to take offense, I'm not sure there is much I could do about it once the tea wears off. Taija was torn between collapsing into hysterical laughter and crying relief. If she wasn't so completely thrown, she might be furious. As it was, she found herself being swept along by Benny. No, no, I understand the why. It's you're a very good liar, Benny. She didn't really mean it as a compliment, but Benny had the temerity to look a bit pleased with herself. Taija dear, you are an absolute treasure, but it is a good thing you were an Aes Sedai in the Age of Legends, because you would have been eaten alive as one in this age. You were an Aes Sedai, weren't you? She frowns. Oh dear, I suppose I should really be calling you Taija Sedai. Taija scowled. Well, not many of today's Aes Sedai would have qualified in my time. She folded her arms across herself petulantly. I wouldn't have voted for you to get the title if I was on the panel back then. Benny just looked at her and then laughed. Of course you would have, dear, like I said. You can't lie for treacle. Taija wanted to be offended, but Benny's smugness was just too funny, or maybe it was just stress. Either way, she found herself breaking into uncontrollable giggles. Just Taija is absolutely fine for you. The two of them talked a bit longer, Taija's anger forgotten, but she had too much that she needed to do. I'm sorry, Benny. I really was telling the truth when I said I couldn't stay. I had a message I needed to give to the Amulin. Well, to see you and Sanch anyway. Ah, yes, like I said, you really are in a pickle. I noticed the girls had returned. They will be seeing the Amulin now, no doubt to be heavily punished for running away. I assume you had something to do with that too. Taija shrugged. Well, I brought them back. They were taken by the Black Adger, tortured. Oh, my goodness. How unpleasant. I take it you dealt with them. I don't think any of those individuals will be troubling anyone again. Benny smiled at that. Well, that is a delight to hear. Benny stood, brushing her dress down. Now, what about you? The old Amulin is gone, I don't know where. She's not dead, she survived. Oh no, I think it would take more than a coup to kill Siu and Sanch. They do not tell the likes of me what happened, but she has gone somewhere. Aleda declared her a traitor and a dark friend. Foolishness, if you ask me, all foolishness. Taija gave her a sideways look. You do realize that if Aleda isn't a dark friend herself, she's almost certainly the puppet of them. Why are you still in the tower? Well, that is simple. Someone has to keep an eye on the novices, do they not? Anyway, I am much too old to go running around outside the tower now. I prefer to leave adventures for the young. Taija shook her head. I can see there's no point trying to persuade you. She smiled sweetly. Indeed, my dear. Anyway, it will take a few hours for the tea to wear off. Perhaps we could have a bit more of a chat before you have to rush off. I take it you will be taking the girls with you. Taija tried not to react. Yes, of course you will. Well, it is probably for the best. I do not think they would enjoy their time back in the tower. A big adventure is good for a young woman, and you will look after them, will you not? Taija nodded, somewhat lost for words. Oh, good. Now, while I have you here. Benny got up and ambled over to her bookshelves. Yes, here. She pulled a large book bound in green leather out. I have been trying to decipher this work for a long time. It is a play, you see, but in the old tongue, and the language used is terribly obscure. Now that you can stop doing such a bad job of pretending not to speak it. She pulled her chair beside Taija's and opened the book to a particular page. Now this passage here talks about a celebrity taking images of themselves at the beach to improve their follower count. I must confess I am stumped by what it is describing. Resigned to her fate, Taija skimmed the passage. Marja poses at the beach at sunset, her boyfriend taking photographs. Marja, don't stop. I need to make sure I've got every angle. June, but Marja, can't we just enjoy the beach? You're already a successful influencer. Marja, my followers need. Taija stopped reading it with a look of disgust. For all the things to have survived. Actually, Benny, I recognize this. She perked up. Oh, really? How fascinating. Taija wasn't sure whether it was funny or tragic. Yes, it was a play about, I suppose, about young people not taking society and their duty to it seriously enough. I actually saw it performed with tea. I saw it performed, and it was utterly terrible. Badly written, trite, and just boring. That only seemed to make Benny more interested. Really? Well, you must tell me more. What is a celebrity? Taija sighed, and tried to think about how she'd explain social media and influencers to someone like Benny. She must have spent a few hours talking with Benny. It was wonderful being able to be open with her. But like so many of the conversations between the two of them, it was a delightfully frustrating experience. Benny seemed to revel in gently teasing her without ever making her feel bad. It was deeply refreshing, and it was with more than a little regret that Taija found herself able to touch the power again and say she had to be leaving. Sadness briefly washed across Benny's normally cheerful face too. Yes, I know, dear. You've got things to be doing, and so have I. I expect the girls will be in the kitchen scrubbing pots already. They will probably be publicly birched tomorrow, so I suppose you had better go and get them. Taija reapplied her webs of illusion and got up from your chair at the same as Benny did. She paused, and then impulsively gave her a tight hug. Benny gently rubbed her back. Life can be difficult for all of us, my dear, but you are a talented woman. Things will get better. You will find happiness again. You must come and visit me, but for now, shoo, off you go. She gently hustled Taija out of her room. Taija's spirit felt a little lighter as she walked away from Benny's rooms. Who would have thought that she'd come out of being drugged and caught out by someone feeling better about the world than she had for quite a while? Clearly her time at the tower was over for now, and good riddance to that. But before she left, she needed to collect the girls. Whether Aleda herself was Black Adger or not, the tower was certainly heavily under their influence. Taija turned towards the kitchens. If they were being punished, she couldn't just ask for them. She'd need a good excuse. That should be simple enough. As she got close to the kitchens, a quick look around told her she was alone, and her appearance rippled into that of a woman she'd known and vaguely disliked before the war, tall and haughty, with the red dress and shawl of an Aes Sedai. Putting on her most irritated look, she picked out Lara's, the mistress of the kitchens, and strode over to her, deftly avoiding scullions and laboring novices. On seeing Taija and the look on her face, she dropped into a low curtsy. "Can I help you?" I said. "Yes. The Amulin requires that the 3 runaways be taken to the mistress of novices. Summon them at once." She gestured at the busy room. A scowl crossed Lara's face at her peremptory tone. I had understood that they were to spend the next 2 hours here. She added a belated, "I said I," when Taija scowled. "It is not for me, and certainly not for you to question the Amulin, unless you wish to explain the delay to her yourself." No, of course not," I said. She was not a submissive woman. Taija suspected that if she were actually one of the tower's Aes Sedai, she might have just caused herself problems. As it was, she got what she wanted. Soon the 3 girls were hauled up in front of her, looking both filthy and thoroughly miserable. Channeling her best, modern Aes Sedai, Taija looked them over and sniffed. "Come." Without another word, she turned to leave, not bothering to check they were following, kitchen staff jumping out of her way. As soon as she was out of sight of the kitchen, Taija turned down a less busy corridor and channeled, forming a gateway back to Falme. With a fizz, it failed to form. Shit. The whole tower. If Siwyn was gone, one of the Forsaken. She turned to the confused, increasingly worried-looking girls. "Right, girls, it's me. We're leaving right now. You're my servants. Don't speak to anyone unless you're spoken to." She spoke quickly. "Taija said I. Aleda is," Egwene gasped, and then clamped her mouth shut at a stern look from Taija and nodded. Taija spun inverted flows of Sedar around them, and all 3 rippled, their faces altering and dresses changing into plain brown servant's wool. A quick knot in the webs, and then she also hid their ability to channel. "Whatever you do, let me do the talking and don't embrace the source." Again they nodded hurriedly. "Good, let's go right now." Taija turned on her heel and channeled again, her face and outfit rippling into what she hoped was a dark-skinned, wealthy merchant's look. Then she headed for the tower gates, the girls trailing behind her, eyes downcast. Taija wished she had something for them to carry, but it would have to do. As it was, no one challenged her leaving the tower. She'd have to leave the horses and her pack behind, but the risk of collecting them was too great. If Benny was suspicious of the Lady Ilfreda, then no doubt other people were too. Taija was soon striding through the streets of Tar Valon, safely out from whatever anti-traveling wards there were in the tower, and looking for a suitable alley to duck into. There. A few more steps, and the 4 of them were back in Falme. As she headed back to the palace that had been occupied by Rand, and the rest after the Cinchen departed, Taija saw Moiraine and a familiar face coming down the street. Because, of course, Siwyn Sanch would have made her way there. Chapter 32. Interlude Roman 7. The modern world is a lonely place Roman 3. Chapter text Interlude Roman 7. The modern world is a lonely place Roman 3. Taija didn't really know how the calendar these days matched up with the one she was familiar with. She didn't even know what day it would be under her own calendar if you counted forward from the day she was displaced. She'd spent too many days unconscious to have much idea, and it wasn't like anyone else had much of a clue, so she had to make her best guess. Tell's birthday had been in early November, and she seemed to be firmly into autumn here, so she just chose a day and decided that was his birthday. She was never devout or superstitious, but some things were important. Taija chose a moment when she wasn't being pestered, when she could make a discreet exit from Falme. Opening a gateway, she stepped through to high mountains. It was cold, freezing in fact, but she didn't really notice. Tell had loved the mountains. Long hikes through them together had been. She sniffed hard and rubbed at her eyes. Drawing on Sedar, Taija channeled water to clear a space in the snow on the ground before bending her web, drawing it up and into a little shelter of compressed snow and ice, creating a little alcove that protected from the biting wind. Another web, of earth this time, smoothed out the bare rock inside the shelter before she used the web to draw a shape straight into that rock, a circle with 7 lines through it, the 7-spoked wheel that drove the pattern. She took a moment to survey her work before deciding she was satisfied with it. Then she took a candle out from the pocket of her coat. Reaching down, she carefully placed it in the middle of the wheel where the spokes came together and lit it with a tiny web of fire. Another moment, and she knelt down on the cold stone. Her hands were trembling, but not from the cold, and she forced them into stillness. She needed to be in control of herself for this. Taija stared into the candle for a few seconds, and then said the traditional, simple words spoken at the end of every funeral, her voice trembling as she struggled to get them out. Go peacefully into the night, tell Janin Alinsar. May the light of the Creator bless your soul, and may you soon be reborn to live again. You were loved, and you will be remembered. There was no one else there to repeat the last words as was traditional, to remember him with her. She was the only one left. Taija knelt there, cold seeping into her for she didn't know how long, just looking into the flickering light of the candle without really seeing it. Eventually she spoke. I miss you, Tell. I miss you so much. Everything is wrong here and I just don't know what I'm doing. I had so much more to say to you, so much more to do with you. She trailed off, silent for a while, her body shaking with stifled sobs. I'm trying to live on. I know that's what you'd have wanted, but I don't know if I can do it. I love you and I can't stand it here without you. Everything I see reminds me of you or what we've lost, what was done to our world. These people are living in the ruins of our dreams. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but she needed to say this to him. He was the only one who'd understand. I worry that I'm making everything worse, and sometimes they just make me so angry. I just want to burn it all down. I know I can't. I know these people need me, however ignorant, wrong, offensive they are. I know I need to go on, that I can't just leave them to their fate, but I hate it. I hate it so much. I know, and Aes Sedai never gives up. A weak smile washed over her face at an old, inside joke quickly extinguished. But it's so hard. I need you, and all I can think about is how you must have died, alone in the war or from the madness. I might have been able to save you, but I wasn't there. She hesitated. I wish I'd died too. Her last words were a whisper. Eventually, Taija looked away from the candle and said it one more time, the formality of the words feeling wrong somehow. Tell Janin Alinsar, you were loved and you will be remembered. She hesitated a moment longer then, shivering with the cold she hadn't noticed until then. She got up and spun a gateway back to Falme. With Taija gone, there was only a small flame left, flickering on top of the 7-spoked wheel in memory of the man she loved. Chapter 33. Calm in Falme. Chapter text, chapter Roman 25. Calm in Falme. Taija shooed the girls away and went to meet Siwan. It made sense that she would have come to Falme, given everything, but she really wasn't looking forward to their conversation. When Siwan saw Taija, she immediately turned towards her, Moiraine in two. Taija, said I, a word if you please. Taija sighed internally. Of course, Siwan, said I. The light of Sedar sprung up around Siwan, and she spun a ward against eavesdropping. Siwan's first words were not what Taija had expected. I am glad to see you are still alive, and the girls are safe. When I got here and was told that you had gone to the tower, I feared you had jumped straight from the net to the frying pan. Thank you for your concern, Siwan, said I, but I saw what happened to Lean. I'm so sorry. Taija shook her head sadly in genuine sympathy. What happened? Siwan's face hardened. A tragedy and a crime, one which I intend to see paid for in full. We have clearly underestimated the Black Adger and have suffered the consequences, with one of their own elevated to the Amulin seat. Taija frowned. So you think Aleda is actually black? If she is not, then she is certainly their puppet. Siwyn shook her head. To think, the tower stood united for centuries, and now it has split, under my leadership. It's not your fault, Siwyn, said I. Taija tentatively placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She must have been suffering as she didn't brush it off, but Taija could feel her tension under it. If the shadow was incompetent then, it would have been defeated long ago. Even with all of the knowledge we had in my time, dark friends were able to betray the light again and again. However many we caught, there were always more. Taija stared into the distance for a second before catching herself with a shake. Siwyn wasn't her favorite woman, but she couldn't have been in a good place right then, and Taija really couldn't see that she'd done anything wrong. What happened? She asked again. When a ship runs aground, the captain must take responsibility. Siwyn looked down at the ground, before visibly pulling herself together. I am not sure how the Black Adger learned of our activities, but something must have given them warning. The day after you left for Falmi, Javindra and Duhara both vanished. Of course, I set some of the sisters to looking for them, but I already suspected that the Black Adger was aware of our activities. She paused and took a deep breath. I was reading reports the next day, alone in my office, and I heard the bell that told me a channeler had crossed the wards outside. I had not been expecting visitors, but I am a busy woman. People regularly come to interrupt me. It is one of the less attractive aspects of being the Amulin. Taija nodded, and Siwyn continued after a pause. That would not have been significant, except the bell chimed many times, more than 6 before I lost count. That was unusual. Thank the light, I had been paranoid. A brief hint of irritation flashed across her face. I had been thinking about how you beat Moiraine and me in Falmi. I know you are strong, but I also know everyone has limits, and you seem to channel while shielded. It was not possible. It took me much longer than it should have, and learning to invert weaves from you, but I think you may have warded the room before we were ever in it. Taija did her best to keep her face blank, giving Siwyn the blandest look she could. No matter. Regardless, it saved my life. I still cannot work out how you triggered the wards while shielded, but nevertheless, I had prepared my office, and the corridor outside it, in case the Black Adger came for me. They thought they had me trussed up, but they found a lionfish in their nets. A brief look of despair crossed her face before she brought it back to its normal composure. I felt Auric die right then. I was reeling from the shock, but I knew I had to act. I threw open the door with a weave of air, and as soon as I saw Aleda and the sisters with her in the corridor, I activated the wards. I can only hope I did not kill any innocent sisters, although certainly any who were aiding the Black Adger, whether wittingly or unwittingly. Her face promised revenge. But when the corridor exploded into fire, there were certainly injuries, if not deaths. While they were gathering themselves, I traveled out to the tower grounds to rally the other Aes Sedai against this coup. Her posture slumping a little, Siwyn continued. I think I would even have succeeded if not for one thing. I found Angier and Megan and set them to finding every sister they could and warning them of what was happening. Then I was attacked by a pair of sisters. I do not know if they were Black Adger or mere tools, but they named me Dark Friend. I was able to hold them off, but together they were gradually overwhelming me. I was losing, but then Lena appeared, I do not know where from, and added her strength to mine. Another sister joined our attackers, but we were able to defeat one of them. Lean burnt her to cinders while I held off the other two. A second sister joined us, and it was clear we were going to win this battle, and then I would rally the loyal sisters and cleanse the tower of its infestation. I was thinking that the Black Adger had just made their greatest mistake, revealing themselves but failing to successfully wield the knife. Then she arrived. Siwyn tensed up under Taija's hand again. A woman of monstrous power joined the battle. If I had not known better, I would have thought it was you. I know appearances mean little, but she must have been one of the Forsaken. Like you, she hid her strength, but she was clearly far stronger than any of us. By then, we had 3 other sisters on our side, and 2 of them just burst. Lean flung herself forward, throwing every ounce of Sedar she could at that woman, and told me to run, to preserve the tower, to guide the dragon. A second later, the light of Sedar winked out around Lean. The woman shielded her, just like it was nothing, and I ran. The White Tower needed to survive. The Black Adger could not be allowed to control it. The world depends on it, but light help me, I still ran. You did what you had to do. Taija knew words weren't enough. She'd seen it too many times during the war, had it said to her enough too. You could never have fought one of the Forsaken head-on. The important thing is that you're alive. Lean's sacrifice wasn't wasted, and the Black Adger still have opposition. Better to survive to fight again than to spend your life for nothing. Eleda's time will come. Siwen's face could have been carved from stone. Yes, they will find there are rocks beneath the waves. I have been gathering loyal sisters. They are few for now, but Eleda cannot be allowed to control the tower. She paused. I should warn you, as they captured Lean, they no doubt know about you. She is a strong woman, but they would be able to make anyone talk eventually. Taija winced at the thought. Poor Lean, I'd realized. If we're lucky, Eleda may not believe everything she hears, but it will no doubt get back to whichever of the Forsaken is working with the Black Adger, and I think we'd be extremely lucky if she didn't believe it. Especially after Falme. Taija glanced at the battered buildings surrounding her. It was inevitable, really, and I never did like hiding. Before Siwen turned to leave, another thought occurred to Taija. Siwen, said I, what about the binding, oath rod? Do you have that? Despite her face, Siwen seemed to age when Taija asked her that. No, Taija, said I, the oath rod remains in the tower, so without it we are still vulnerable to the Black Adger. Taija found Rand the next day. He was still limping around, but looking much better. How are you feeling? She was concerned about him. With the power for healing, even this time's crude version, he should have been looking much better by then. It still hurt some, she could tell by the way he moved. The wound, the dark one. He saw the look she gave him. Fine, Ishmael, gave me just won't heal properly, despite whatever Moiraine does. She even linked with that Aes Sedai dam in Rima, and they couldn't do much more. I'm sorry, Rand, Taija murmured. She'd already had a summary of what had happened at the battle before she left for the White Tower, but the damage done to him was shocking. A passing soldier gave him a bow, my Lord Dragon. Taija raised her eyebrows at him, and Rand scowled. Moiraine told me the battle with Ishmael was as prophesied. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, saw it. He concentrated and recited, twice and twice shall he be marked, twice to live, and twice to die. Once the heron to set his path. Twice the heron to name him true. Once the dragon for remembrance lost. Twice the dragon for the price he must pay. 5 ride forth and 4 return. Above the watchers over the waves shall he proclaim himself, bannered cross the sky in fire. With a grimace he showed her his palms, both now marked with herons. No dragons yet, I suppose. Well, Taija was a little lost for words. It could be a mistake. It could be a coincidence. It could be manipulation from someone. I don't know. It may also be that this talk of the prophecies of the dragon is true. You know what I think of prophecy, but if the evidence starts to mount, then there's something going on. Her answer didn't seem to reassure Rand all that much. So you think I should be acting like I am the dragon? No, she shook her head. I think you should be ready for the possibility. How do I think you should act? I don't want to tell you what to do. You've got Moiraine for that. That got a half-amused grunt out of him. Taija pondered for a few seconds. I think you should think like an Aes Sedai. Act like Moiraine, you mean? She could tell Rand's annoyed by the idea. Taija gave him a disappointed look. Act like a real Aes Sedai. Not one of this time's. She restrained herself and chose a more moderate word, interpretation of the idea. Being Aes Sedai means being a servant of all, serving the people. It also means balance. You're not a slave, you have your life to live too. You can, no must, think for yourself. You must also accept that you're one of the people, not above them, not separate from them. She thought for a moment. I suppose what it really boils down to is always working to build a better world. That's the basic philosophy of being Aes Sedai. She could tell that the idea at least appealed more to Rand than imitating Moiraine. You knew the dragon, didn't you? Back in your time. You've mentioned him before, but you always seemed a little reluctant to talk about him. Not about him as such. I don't know, Taija shrugged, staring into the distance. It can be painful talking about my time. There are so many things that are gone, people that I've lost. There were bad times at the end, but still, this really wasn't what Rand wanted or needed to hear. Taija pulled herself together with an effort, forcing more cheer into her voice. Yes, I knew Luz Thurin, probably the most respected man in the world. He was an incredibly talented man, unmatched in his abilities. Rand looked intrigued. He was also a flawed man. You people have your stories about him being a kinslayer and bringing the madness. I don't mean that. She stopped to think about the best way to put this to Rand. She didn't want him to start feeling he needed to live up to some mythological ideal. But equally, she didn't want to depress him even more or talk down someone that was, at the end of the day, a hero. He always did what he thought was right, and he almost always succeeded in it. There's no doubt that he was a great man, and that's why he's remembered. But he sometimes lost touch with the little people. I never knew him well, we only met a few times, but I remember the epic arguments between him and T that he had when people disagreed with him. He was never malicious, a truly good man, but I do wonder sometimes whether if he'd been a bit kinder, would things have been the same as they were. Barid Bell, Duram Laddle, maybe even Mirin Iranil. Including that last name pained her, but she did wonder. It was after the wedding that she truly started to go bad. Who were they? Rand asked with confusion, and Taija realized she'd sunk into reminiscence again. Sorry, I have too many memories sometimes. Look, the key thing I want you to remember is that you're not Luz Thurin, reborn or not. You're Randall Thor, and every choice you make is your own. Remember that dragon, reborn or not, you need friends. Luz Thurin was a great man, maybe you can be a better one. Rand was silent for a while and then asked, but the dragon was an Aes Sedai, wasn't he? Well, yes, obviously. Taija wasn't sure where he was going with the question. He nodded to himself, apparently satisfied. All right, thank you, Taija Sedai, I appreciate it. Just Taija, the title's only for formal occasions and people I need to make a point to. Both their appetites for conversation seemed to have dried up after that, and they soon headed their separate ways. A day later, Taija was summoned by a servant to see Moiraine and Siwin. She'd thought Siwin had left, but it seemed she was back again already. With traveling, it wouldn't be that big a deal for her to bouncing around. She'd hardly have thought anything of it in her own time after all. She'd loved living in Jalanda, but if she'd wanted, there'd have been little to stop her from commuting halfway across the planet. Siwin and Moiraine both greeted her with expressionless looks, but Moiraine took the lead. Taija Sedai, are you aware of young Mat's condition? Taija shrugged. I know he's not well, something about a cursed dagger, an item of the shadow. I thought you were going to cure him of it. Not of the shadow, but similar. Moiraine's face was as composed as ever, but Taija thought she couldn't detect a hint of worry in her voice. I had tried, with the Amulin, but we do not have sufficient strength. He is too far gone. Siwin interjected. He is clearly important as the sounder of the horn. Taija was still skeptical about the story of ancient heroes being summoned by it, maybe constructs of some kind if it was a Turangreel. Also, young Rand has made his feelings on the matter clear, so it seems we must ask for your help. Taija held up her hands. I'd love to help. I can't say I know Mat very well, but that's nothing to do with it. The problem is I just don't have much talent with healing. I've seen Moiraine heal. She's far better than I am. Taija wasn't sure if there was the ghost of a smirk on Siwin's face at her admission. We feared you might say that, but we had not been thinking in those terms. Even with your angriel, I doubt you have much more strength than the two of us combined using Moiraine's angriel. She paused, and Taija carefully didn't fill the silence. She liked keeping a bit of ambiguity about her strength. When Taija didn't confirm or deny it, Siwin continued, we would ask you to link with us, to lend strength to Moiraine as she melds the flows. Taija didn't hesitate. Absolutely not. Find someone else. There was no way that she was giving Moiraine or Siwin control over her like that. There were ways, of course, but breaking a link once you were in, it was not an easy process if the leader didn't want to release you. There is no one else, Taija said. Siwin glanced at Moiraine. We will bring the girls into the link as well, Rima too, and some of the freed damning, but I think without your strength it will be insufficient. Taija shook her head in denial. She really don't want to do this. The risk of giving them control, having them share her head however briefly, both ideas repulsed her. For a brief moment she seriously considered just letting Mat die. She didn't really know him. But that wasn't the person she wanted to be, and he was Rand's friend. Do you swear that you don't think it can be done without me? Siwin nodded. You have my word. Moiraine then followed up. You know we are bound by the 3 oaths. In the hope that it will persuade you, I swear on the light, and my hope of rebirth, that I will release you from the link immediately upon the healing being completed or upon your request. She had clearly been thinking about it, anticipating Taija's response. Taija was not actually completely sure that they were bound by the three oaths. Siwyn had had a lot of time with the binding rod, even if she did lose it during the coup. Taija knew she'd have made some changes to what was binding her if she'd been in Siwyn's shoes, but then she'd never have done something so stupid as to voluntarily bind herself. She hadn't seen Moiraine swear with it at all, but at least she was fairly sure she wasn't a dark friend. After a moment of mental examination for loopholes in the oath, Taija slowly nodded. I suppose I can accept that, but I also want your word that you will not pass control of the link to anyone else. Rand had better be grateful for her agreeing to this. Not that she'd ever tell him how much it bothered her. The poor boy had enough burdens. Moiraine didn't hesitate to agree to Taija's additional promise, which was at least reassuring. Once Taija had agreed, it didn't take long to get everyone assembled. She quickly realized they were all essentially waiting for her. Presumably Siwyn realized she'd be the most difficult. Trying not to look too unhappy about it, Taija joined the circle of women surrounding Mat's bed, sparing a nod for the three girls. He lay there, eyes closed, his fist gripping a ruby-hilted dagger tightly to his chest. She could almost taste the miasma of filth surrounding it and him. Moiraine had said it wasn't related to the shadow, but it certainly felt similar. Taija had always hated being in links, unless she was leading them. Sometimes it was necessary for professional reasons, but she generally did her best to avoid it. The intrusion of feeling all of the other men and women in the link was more than bad enough, but it was the control it gave people over her that made truly, deeply uncomfortable. Especially when she'd been younger. A young woman with her strength was an attractive part of any link, and there had been that one incident in the early days of the collapse. It had been better once she was more experienced. After that, she was always the one leading the link when one was needed, and most of the time she'd had enough strength to do things without links. The only person she ever really felt comfortable linking with was Tell, and well, he wasn't here. Resisting the urge to clutch at her coat, Taija placed herself just on the edge of embracing Sedar. At least people seemed too nervous around her to comment on her choice to wear men's clothes instead of dresses, now that she was back in Falme. Gradually, the light of Sedar moved round the circle of women, merging together into one bright glow as Moiraine brought them into the circle one by one. She left Taija for last, and she had a moment where she had to desperately resist the urge to fight before she was drawn in and lost control. The whole room was suffused in the glow of Sedar, weak around some and bright around others, very bright around Moiraine with her angriel. Of course, even if Taija could see herself, she wouldn't have been glowing given the inverted webs over her. "Let us begin," said Moiraine. Despite her discomfort when she felt Sedar being drawn through her, Taija watched Moiraine intently as she started to spin her web. It was simple on the surface, primarily spirit, but with water and air mixed into it. However, the more Taija looked, the more intricacies she saw. She had no real talent for healing, but she could still analyze it alongside admiring the way Moiraine spun the web covering young Mat and the dagger in a complex interweaving of bright threads. Then Moiraine began the real work, drawing hard on the power through everyone in the circle. Fine threads become wrist-thick, shining, dense flows, and the dagger started to pull away from Mat, his hand still clutched around it. Moiraine was drawing a gigantic amount of Sedar. A full circle of 13 with Taija in it, and a number of other women of not insignificant strength. She could shatter a city with that. The girls looked halfway between fascination and ecstasy. A low groan from Mat slowly turned into a full-on scream as the power pulled his fingers off the dagger one by one. As the last one came off it, his shriek reached a crescendo before he suddenly went limp. Everything moved fast after that. Moiraine deposited the dagger in a lead-lined box that she procured from somewhere, and then ran an overpowered healing web through Mat, leaving him spasming and shivering. A second later, the light of Sedar winked out from around the other women, and Taija felt herself released from the link. She slumped, unrealized tension released from her body. Taija spent some of her time in Falme, continuing her lessons with the girls. Egwene's strength had leapt forward during her time with the Cinchin. It seemed that they were forcing it, ignorant or perhaps uncaring the dangers. The White Tower taught more slowly than safety really demanded, but there were limits, probably the least of their crimes. Elaine was developing well too, but was still some way behind given how she'd spent the last couple of months hiding her channeling. Both girls threw themselves into the time Taija spent with them with a fierce determination. Her instincts told her to keep the pace slow, have them working on all of the little things that she'd expect any properly educated channeler to know and understand, but the girls begged her to teach them more. She knew they were grasping for control in any way they could after the experience of Falme, but she didn't give in immediately. In hindsight, Taija wasn't too surprised when Nynaeve also appeared with them on the second day, asking respectfully to join their lessons. Nynaeve was a very different kettle of fish to the girls. A fish analogy was Siwyn getting to her, older, quieter, and much less willing to submit herself to Taija's authority during the lessons. I simply don't see the point of us spending time on this, Taija. She gave Nynaeve a look, and the woman belatedly added, Sedai, we need to learn useful weaves, not be doing novice exercises all the time. Taija resisted the urge to tell her she was welcome to leave if she didn't like what she had to teach. Nynaeve had a way of getting under her skin a bit, but the poor woman was trying to process having her life turned upside down, starting with her being dragged out of her comfortable village life and culminating in 2 weeks of torture. No, Nynaeve, you need to do this because it's the foundation of so many aspects of channeling. Just because you've been taught inadequately by the Aes Sedai in the White Tower doesn't mean that I will ignore it. Nynaeve changed track suddenly. Why do you always sound so? She groped for a word, dismissive when you talk about Aes Sedai. You are one, aren't you? Damn, Taija hadn't mean to show her feelings so clearly. No wonder Benny said she was a terrible liar. The Aes Sedai. She was careful to moderate her tone this time, are dedicated servants of the light who work very hard for it, on the whole. She belatedly added the caveat. The look Nynaeve gave her told Taija she was unconvinced. A couple of days later, when she had the three of them in front of her, Taija decided that Nynaeve did have something of a point, and she'd also had enough of the girls nagging. They could always work on their fine control of the power, and she was skeptical about teaching some things to them at all, particularly Egwene and Elaine given their age. However, Taija could admit that if they'd known how to travel, all kinds of problems would have been solved much more easily. Of course others might have been caused. If Egwene or Nynaeve had been able to teach the Cincian how to travel, it would have potentially been a big problem. Regardless, she'd made her decision. Girls, today we're going to be studying something new. They perked up at that, although not quite as much as Taija had expected. She'd noticed they'd been whispering together a lot recently, and were right before she'd arrived too, and now they seemed distracted. I'm going to need you to promise me you won't teach this to anyone else without my permission. It's both dangerous and a huge advantage while the knowledge hasn't spread. She got a series of nods and continued, after pausing for dramatic effect. Very well, today you are going to start to learn how to travel. Nynaeve heard the other two girls' gasps and only maintained her own dignity by resisting the urge to join them. If only she'd had the same ability as Taija, been able to just step through holes in the air, so many things could have been avoided. The way that Taija just casually used gateways was fascinating. Her tendency to always invert the webs, on the other hand, was deeply irritating. Normally, Nynaeve could pick things up after seeing them even just once, but that woman kept her secrets closer to her than a newborn with its mother. If she never even saw the threads, then how could she copy them? The first thing we will discuss is safety. This is dangerous, and if you don't treat it with the respect that it deserves, then I won't be teaching you anything at all. Taija had taken on what Nynaeve had come to recognize as her lecturing tone, more confident and smooth, with a hint of authority running through it. By now Nynaeve had gotten used to the woman's odd accent, words and syllables seeming to be clipped short or swallowed, emphasis on the wrong parts of words. However, Nynaeve still couldn't work out where it came from, especially combined with her strange vocabulary and use of words that Nynaeve was sure were very typically Andoran. Elaine had also told her that the woman seemed to speak the old tongue whenever she was stressed, albeit with a very odd accent, which was all the stranger. Of course, the daughter heir would know that sort of thing, although she had confessed that she often found it difficult to follow what Taija was actually saying in it. It was a conundrum, and Nynaeve intended to get to the bottom of it. Egwene and Elaine seemed to accept Taija for what she was, looking up to her like lost puppies. Nynaeve, on the other hand, wasn't so young and naive. She knew that things weren't always what they seemed. And after her time with the Cinchen, she wasn't going to let herself get caught out again. She'd spent long nights speculating with the girls, who couldn't seem to agree even between themselves. Elaine thought that Taija was from a rival group of Aes Sedai, somewhere else in the world. Maybe Shara, she'd said, nodding to herself like the girl knew anything more than the rest of them about the place. Egwene, on the other hand, pointed to the odd bits of knowledge that Taija had, the way she'd spoken about the Forsaken with such familiarity. She was convinced the woman was like the heroes of the Horn, a great figure spun out from the pattern to help guide the dragon to his ultimate victory over the shadow. Obviously, that was ridiculous, but Nynaeve had her own suspicions. She watched the way the woman talked about the Aes Sedai of the White Tower, ranging from frosty politeness to barely veiled contempt. It was strange, suspicious even. Of course, Nynaeve had her own views on those women, but she had her reasons for them, and certainly wasn't going around claiming to be an Aes Sedai. She'd also spoken with Rand about her concerns over Taija, and he'd angrily stood up for her, saying that she hadn't done anything other than support him, unlike all the other women around him. She really didn't know what was going on with him. He'd changed since they left Immon's field, and she wasn't sure it was for the better. In the end, it wasn't what was important at the moment, and regardless, he wasn't too old for her to take a switch to him if he didn't behave himself. Whatever was going on with Rand, the way Taija spoke about Aes Sedai didn't quite fit. She insisted on the title and then spoke with contempt about them in the next sentence. Then there were her eyes. She seemed normal whenever you spoke to her, but when she thought no one was looking, or sometimes when she spoke about certain things, Nynaeve could recognize that long, sad, empty stare into nothingness. Finally, she mentally ticked off another point. The woman seemed to know some of the Forsaken in ways that made no sense at all. She supposed an ancient hero might have known them once, but the sadness, the deep sense of regret she sometimes exuded made no sense at all in that context. Of course, Nynaeve had her own theory. All that knowledge, all those regrets. It was said no one could walk in the shadow so long they could not return to the light, and she suspected, or maybe feared, that that was exactly what they were seeing every day. If that was the case, though, she couldn't leave the two girls alone with Taija. It wasn't that she thought she would do anything bad to them. She'd seen what the woman had done to free Egwene, and her of course, but she could accept it was really Egwene she came for. Actually, that kind of brutality was perhaps more evidence. The way Egwene said she just killed her Sul'dam. Nynaeve could also see through the grumpy facade to the genuine fondness Taija clearly felt for the two girls. But they hadn't the sense of a toddler between them when it came to Taija, and who knew what she might teach them, or how she might influence them. No, Nynaeve wasn't worried she'd hurt them, but she still needed to keep an eye on her for their own good. She'd asked Moiraine about Taija with gritted teeth, and the woman had just given her a cool look and told her that Taija's secrets were hers to keep, and to ask her if it bothered her that much. Nynaeve had hated having to ask Moiraine for anything, but she needed to know, so she'd even asked Moiraine directly whether Taija had once been one of the Forsaken. The woman had given her the blankest look she'd ever seen from her, and then bluntly told her that she would be deeply foolish to even suggest the possibility to the woman, but to feel free to dig her own grave if she so desired. She reached to tug her braid in frustration, only to remember it wasn't there anymore. Of course, she wasn't going to get straight answers from an Aes Sedai, but she'd find out what was going on with Taija one way or another. Chapter 34, Interlude Roman 8, The Modern World is a Lonely Place Roman 4. Chapter text Interlude Roman 8, The Modern World is a Lonely Place Roman 4. For light's sake, Taija, calm down. You're past 150, not 15. Stop fretting. Taija shot her mother an exasperated look. I'm not fretting. I'm just getting ready. You're fretting and you're overexcited. She gave Taija a look of her own as she stood there, hands on her hips, still fit despite the fact she was starting to show her age at over 200. You've already rearranged the living room twice. Taija hurriedly put the cushion back onto the sofa and pretended she hadn't been doing anything of the sort before her mother turned back to the kitchen, her white hair disappearing round the corner. Well, I'm excited, Nerina piped up. I've seen him on TV, and he looks so cool. Taija took the time to ruffle her long hair. She just dyed it blue. Apparently that was what all the kids were doing these days. And if you say that to him, I will be very upset, Nerina." Her niece grinned up at her. "I know, Auntie Taija, don't worry. I have to pretend I've never seen him before." "You know," her mother called from the kitchen, "if I like him, I might get a poster of him for my bedroom to match Nerina's." Taija made a strangled, choking sound. "Nerina, you have a poster of Tell in your bedroom." However, before Taija could get an answer, a loud chime sounded through the apartment. She started towards the door, but Nerina was faster, already moving, racing ahead of Taija and dodging her attempt at grabbing her. "I'll get it. Shit." Taija muttered to herself before pursuing her niece at an only slightly slower pace. By the time she reached the door, Nerina already had it open. "Hello, are you Taija's boyfriend? I'm not allowed to recognize you." With a muttered curse, Taija grabbed Nerina and lifted her away. "Go help Mum." For a moment she might protest, and then she dashed back towards the kitchen, leaving Taija to nervously smile up at Tell. "Hello. I'm so sorry." She's just overexcited. Tell looked as good as ever, smart trousers and white shirt that she was quite sure was more fashionable than anything she'd ever wear, accentuating his ruggedly good looks. He gave her an amused smile before leaning in to kiss her and wrapping her in a tight hug. "Hello to you too." A moment later, Taija remembered herself and pulled away. Come in, and close the door behind you. You'll let mosquitoes in, and I haven't fixed the anti-bug wards yet. Mum's just in the kitchen. Try not to let Nerina bother you. I think she must have been eating sugar all morning or something." She shrugged, slightly embarrassedly. Tell just laughed. "She's adorable, don't worry. Here, hold this for a second." He passed Taija the bag he'd been carrying and started unlacing his boots. Unable to resist, Taija poked her nose into the bag to find a bunch of flowers, a box of chocolate from a Perrin Disen shop she vaguely recognized as being far too expensive, and a bottle of wine. "Ooh, are the flowers for me, and the chocolate?" Tell gave her a look as he pulled off his boots. "You know perfectly well they're not. HMPH. How slippers are there?" She pointed at a rack. "Come on." With a good-natured grumble, Tell slid his feet into the slippers and took the bag back from Taija, letting her half lead, half drag him to the kitchen. "Mum, this is Tell." Taija caught herself. "My boyfriend, Tell Janin Alinsar of Paran Disen." Tell gave her mother a smile and a low, formal bow appropriate for an honored elder. "It's a pleasure and an honor to finally meet Taija's mother." Her mother giggled, actually giggled. She was over 200 for light's sake. Then gave Tell a bow of her own, much more casual in style than Tell's. "Arivia Kosola, so you're the one who's finally managed to catch young Professor Kosola's eye. It's a delight to finally meet you. Nerina and I are very excited. You know, it's been nearly 50 years since she brought someone back here." "Mum." Her mother ignored the warning note in her voice and gave Tell an appraising look. "And you're just as handsome as she said you are. I don't know why she's been hiding you from us for the last 2 years." "Mum," Taija interspersed herself between them, very deliberately not catching Tell's amused eyes. "You've already met Nerina, of course." Tell grinned at her niece, of course. He gave her a low bow, even lower than he'd given her mother. "I've heard you're the one that's really in charge here." Nerina just giggled and looked at the floor, suddenly shy, until she remembered her manners and returned Tell's bow with one of her own. "I'm Nerina Kosola." Moment later, Taija's mother was bustling around them. "Come along, make yourselves comfortable. Dinner will be ready soon. Can I get you a drink, Tell Janin? Wine, beer, some water. Please call me Tell." Oh, for a second his smooth composure was broken as he remembered the bag in his hands. "I brought these for you. Thank you for having me here." Tell pulled out the flowers, chocolate, and bottle of wine, handing them to her mother with a small bow. "Oh, thank you. How lovely. I'll go get a vase." Taija's mother hustled off, so Taija led him to the living room. "Here we are. It's a little small, but it was even smaller than her own apartment in Jalandhar, in fact. She channeled a flow of air to flick a light switch, and the room was bathed in warm light from the lamps Taija had bought her family last year. "It's still home for me." "It's lovely, Taija, and I'm excited to be seeing where you grew up. Now stop fretting and sit down." Tell plunked himself onto the sofa and pulled her down next to him. Nerina found her own seat in one of the two armchairs and sat, staring intently at Tell for a few seconds. Taija was about to tell her stop it when she blurted out, "I saw you on the TV, Tell." "Oh, really?" Tell sounded amused, even as Taija hid her face in her hands. "Yes, you were awesome. Can you teach me to sword fight like that?" "Nerina." The warning tone in Taija's voice was ruined by Tell's chuckle. Of course I can, but where's your sword? Just a sec. Nerina was already off running as Taija looked at Tell. You do realize she's going to be trying to ambush you with a tube of rolled-up cupboard for the rest of evening, right? He shrugged. Well, it'll be good training for me, right? Always on my toes. Idiot. Taija leant into him and relaxed under his arm as her mother bustled back in with some nibbles on a tray. That night, they were curled up in bed together, enjoying the warm afterglow. After all, thin walls really weren't a problem when you could spin wards against sound. Tell's warm body was wrapped around Taija's, spooning her as he whispered, "So do you think they like me?" Taija snorted. "Of course they did. They loved you. You really know how to lay on the charm." She squirmed a little against him. "I hope they weren't too annoying for you, and I know it's not the kind of place you're used to, but—" He gave her a squeeze. "Stop it. Everything's lovely and I'm having a great time. Your mother's charming. She made me feel incredibly welcome, like I was part of the family, and Nerina's just adorable even if she can be vicious with that sword. As for the rest, stop worrying that I'm suddenly going to turn into some kind of snob. I'm just disappointed you didn't bring me here sooner." Taija made a vaguely happy-sounding noise. "Thank you, sweetheart." Chapter 35. You were loved and you will be remembered. Chapter Roman 26. You were loved, and you will be remembered. Taija actually found herself relaxing a bit more as she spent longer in Falme. For once, she actually had some free time, as teaching the girls was only taking up a few hours a day, even with her actually doing it properly rather than sneaking time after everything else. Thankfully, Moiraine had stopped coming and bothering her too. She felt a bit guilty about wasting time, but she also knew deep down that she needed a break. That was why, one day, she headed out from Falme for a long, solitary hike through the hills surrounding it. They weren't mountains, but they would do for now. Her mind kept trying to go back to all the problems she faced, but Taija didn't let it. She was going to enjoy her surroundings and pretend, even if only for a few hours, that she wasn't in this light-forsaken time. Quiet, solitude, and nature. That was what she wanted, and it was what she was getting. With the most relaxed smile she'd had in a while, she paused to watch a particularly brightly colored bird stalk through the grass, looking for insects to eat. After a few hours out in the hills, Taija was actually feeling happy and relaxed. Her day was just going so well. The area around Falme really was lovely, and tensions she'd forgotten were draining away. Even the burn in her thighs as she hauled herself up a hill reminded her of better times. That meant that when she saw a man making his own way towards her through the long grass, Taija was actually in quite a good mood. He looked a bit too well dressed for a farmer, so he must be out on a hike, enjoying the scenery just like she was. Even if she'd rather have been alone, she could hardly begrudge him that. He was unusually tall, dark-haired and handsome, and holding himself in a way that suggested he knew it. Taija didn't recognize him from Falme, although she couldn't see where else he might have come from. Either way, he hailed her with a wave and a hearty hallo, and when he got closer and Taija reluctantly waved back, it didn't take long for his course to intersect with hers, and when it did, he gave her a once-over that made her feel a bit uncomfortable. A fine day for a walk, but it's certainly unusual to see a lady such as yourself out alone. This area has been so troubled recently. Where do you hail from, my lady? His voice was cheerful, seeming to revel in the joy of meeting someone new. I'm coming from Falme, Taija replied, ever so slightly frostily. She didn't want to give him any ideas. I'm just out to enjoy a beautiful day like you. Of course, beautiful, isn't it? I do love this area. He grinned, but there was something just slightly off about him. Tell me, does this beautiful lady have a name? You can call me Naza. It was the first name that sprang to mind. And you? Call me Yin. Taija had embraced Sedar when she first saw him, of course, her ability concealed by the ever-present inverted web. Pleased to meet you, she lied. So have you been in the area long? I, of course, grew up. Taija felt nothing, but something slammed into her connection with the power. He was trying to shield her. Taija didn't let her shock slow her down. She was already leaping away from him and spinning. He was a big man. Staying in his reach would be a huge mistake. Webs sprang into existence around her, fire burning at him, air slicing from the sides, and a shield of her own battering at his connection to the power. All were deflected, batted away like nothing. Other than a small, satisfied smile, like he knew something she didn't, he barely reacted. He must have been strong, very strong, but she didn't recognize him. One of the Forsaken in disguise. It must be. That, or maybe it was what Samuel really looked like. She never met the man after all. It didn't matter. Taija could worry about the who later. For now, she had plenty of strength herself. With her angriel, she'd be no easy prey for any of them. Taija spun all 5 elements together into a beautifully intricate and deadly web around him. Taija must have been fighting hard for at least 20 minutes. The hills around her were covered in scars, or in 1 or 2 cases were much shorter than they before. She could feel the strain, but she wasn't slowing down. Neither was he. Diving to the side, she spun 1, 2, 3, 4 webs, sending shrieking tunnels, fire spiraling outwards towards him, but he was already stepping through a gateway. It was like an almost forgotten dance. He'd step out over there, and she was already moving, drawing fully through her angriel, bringing lightning down from the sky. She didn't bother to invert her webs. He wouldn't be able to see them anyway. The lightning crashed into a shield above him with blinding flashes, and she used the opportunity to dive through her own gateway, spinning as she went. A web came together above her, and hundreds of darts of air and fire slammed into the ground around him, covering it in a roiling wave fire. A big, dramatic web of earth and fire flew back through her gateway, but her real attacks came from a third, open to her side, a bright bar of white-hot fire blasting at him from an unexpected angle. Taija winced when her cut flows snapped back into her, but there was no time to delay. There was no doubt now. The man was clearly one of the Forsaken. He was too strong and too skilled not to be. If not for her angriel, she would already have lost. He was strong, very strong, and seemed to have an uncanny ability to see her best tricks coming. Everything was anticipated and deflected. It was lucky she was so fast and had been able to hold him off in turn. Taija spun a defensive sphere, feeling herself go flying inside it as her vision whited out. She was already spinning. Without thinking, she deflected the lightning that struck from above her and sliced the web looping round behind her. If she was right, he'd be stepping out of a gateway about. There. Drawing hard on Sedai, Taija spun a gateway between her and where she suspected his next web would be coming from. His fire slashed through the gateway and back at him from behind even as Taija opened another too, sending fire through them and bringing a hammer of air down on him from above. Only he'd opened his own gateway, sending his attack back at her again. She dived aside, slicing and spinning webs as she went. She couldn't touch him. Everything she did he seemed to anticipate. Equally, her own skill meant he couldn't seem to land a blow on her either. They seemed to be evenly matched. So far she'd managed to dodge, slice, deflect, or block everything he'd sent at her. Beams of fire bisected where she stood, diverted by several of his gateways, but she'd already traveled, forming a trio of blossoms of fire around him. Without thinking, Taija dived through another gateway just before the earth exploded where she was standing. Was that frustration on his face? Perhaps he was struggling more than she'd thought. Taija flung webs of air at his feet and spun earth, fire, spirit into a blinding flash that should blind him so that her next web, more darts of fire and air, could slip through his defenses. Yet he shielded his eyes at just the right moment. How was he doing this? Absently, she sliced more of his invisible webs coming at her from both front and back. Next would likely be lightning. A barrier of air above her blocked that. She needed to change the dynamic fast. Taija drew all that she could from Sedai and started to spin her webs. White-hot fire exploded, swirling through the air around him, and she was already flinging lightning and blades of air in a full-on frontal attack. No subtlety, something she'd never normally do, but she had an angriel, and she wanted to get a bit closer. Stalking forward, she kept up her onslaught. It seemed to have caught him by surprise at first. He was all frantic defense, cutting webs and diving aside from attacks. Then he traveled, and Taija opened her own gateway. Yes, she had guessed right, stepping out behind him. Taija wasn't hesitating in her onslaught. She got him on the back foot, but he still seemed to have an uncanny ability to tell where the next attack was coming from. Now she was close enough, though. She was hitting him with almost everything she had, but biting her lip with concentration, Taija spun one extra tiny web of razor-sharp fire and spirit and slipped it through the storm of light and power between them. A quick cut, and his appearance rippled. She'd been right. He was in disguise. That won't save you. His tone was grim determination, and he launched his own onslaught. Taija was immediately on the back foot, blinded by the explosions around her, slicing webs, deflecting beams of fire, and simply stopping other attacks dead with walls of cedar. She could feel herself tiring. She wasn't built for going head-to-head with someone like him. If she couldn't fight toe-to-toe, she needed to move. Taija spun a gateway, still furiously fending off his webs, and stepped through it, giving herself distance and moving off to his left. Already she was spinning her own attacks as he turned to face her. Intricate webs of earth, water, and fire circled around a core of spirit formed. Then, for the first time, Taija really saw his face, and the webs were gone, fading into the air around her. Tell, her voice was a whisper. Taija stared, stunned beyond speech, almost beyond thought. Sedar almost slipped away from her, the flow reduced from a torrent to a trickle. Louder, she shouted, Tell. She took a hesitant step forward. It was him, but it couldn't be him. It made no sense. It was like she was in a dream. Everything seemed to be in slow motion. He got a scar across his face, but it was a face that was etched into Taija's mind, one she saw every night as she closed her eyes to sleep. Taija felt a shield push between her and her trickling connection to the power. She tried to draw harder on it, but it was too late. With a deadly finality, the shield slid into place, cutting her off. She didn't understand. It couldn't be someone else, but he couldn't be there. He'd been dead for millennia. He was gone. She broke his illusion, though. It couldn't be a web. He looked furious, stalking towards her. Cold eyes looking down at Taija as she stared up at him, desperately trying to hold the tears in. An invisible fist closed around her, and Taija felt herself be lifted into the air. Did you really think you could fool me? With this? He gestured angrily in her direction. Web of air lifting her was painful, but not as painful as contempt in his voice. And it was definitely his voice. Tell, please, it's me. Stop. Stop using her voice. Stop calling me that. Rage twisted his horribly scarred face, then he smiled cruelly. Let's see who you really are. There was a pause, and nothing happened. Tell, it's me, she said, her voice breaking. At his name, he looked even angrier. He paused again. Taija was fairly sure he was trying to slice any web of illusion over her. Confusion was replacing anger on his face. Taija, you can't be, you're dead. The web of air lowered her to the ground, but still held her. It can't be, you can't be alive. You died and you died. Hope blossomed in Taija's heart. If she survived, maybe he did too. Maybe he'd found a way. Maybe she didn't have to be alone after all. It's me, Tell, it really is me. She thought for a second. The last night we spent together, I asked you to marry me. No, I told you I was going to marry you. No one else knows that. How could they? Oh Lord, it is you. How though? How are you alive? It's been 3,000 years and you're not. Tell looked utterly stunned. A stasis box. There was one in the town hall. Something happened and I'm here. It's been so difficult. She tried to hold herself together. She didn't want to ruin this miracle by breaking down, but tears were already flowing down her cheeks. I thought you were dead. I just. How about you? What happened to you? Was it a stasis box too? Taija barely noticed that the shield and web of air around her were still there. The confusion slowly faded from his face, and a little spark of fear ignited inside her. You have to understand, Taija, after you died, there was none of the gentleness she remembered in his voice. Lose Thurin, the war, they just wouldn't work together. After you died, nothing was the same, and we were losing. Oh Lord, we were losing. Tell, I don't understand. What do you mean? No. No, 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 no. He trailed to a halt, shaking his head, despair warring with anger on his face. Taija, he stopped, and suddenly a gateway sprang open beside him. A step, and he was gone. As the gateway closed, the web's shielding and holding Taija faded, and she sunk to her knees, staring at the burnt ground, mind completely numb. Taija didn't know how long she'd have stayed there on her knees if she hadn't heard the mocking applause start from behind her. Well, that was utterly delightful, I must say. She looked up through watery eyes to see the person she least wanted to see at that moment, Mirin. She smiled at Taija, coming to stand next to her, an ostensibly comforting hand on her shoulder. That must have been quite difficult for you, and dear Tell, of course, but I did not quite get everything I wanted from it. Taija gathered herself, preparing to strike. She was tired, but she had an angriel. Mirin might not know about it. Mirin gave Taija's shoulder a little squeeze. He can be quite an annoying man sometimes, but you know I've spent a lot more time with Tell than you have recently. Taija frantically shook her head in denial. Of course we don't call him that anymore. No, she begged, already knowing. Please. Mirin squeezed her shoulder again, a happy, almost giggle in her voice. Now we call him Samuel. With a scream of rage, Taija drew every ounce of power that she could. If not for the Angreal's buffer, she'd have burnt herself out in a flash, the air around her transforming to blinding, white-hot fire in an instant. But Mirin was already gone. Taija didn't know how long she knelt there, staring blankly at the circle of earth fused into glass around her. But eventually, the silence was broken when she heard hoofbeats and voices approaching. She couldn't talk to anyone. Couldn't deal with this. Taija got to her feet, briefly meeting Moiraine and Alexi's eyes as they rode towards her at a canter at the head of a large group. With a thought, she bent reality into a gateway and stepped out into forest, vaguely remembered from her first weeks in this nightmarish time. Uninhabited, far from any village. Anger, despair, frustration, misery, rage were tumbling through her, an uncontrollable mass of feelings that overwhelmed her, yet couldn't even start to fill the hole inside her. She needed to let it out. She wanted the world to be gone, to punish it for what it had done to her. Sedar flooded through Taija and straight out again. She didn't bother with complex webs, just simple devastation blasting outwards. Trees flashed into roaring infernos. Blades of air sliced through meter-thick trunks like they weren't even there. The very ground rose up to swallow and crush centuries-old trees. Taija let her absolute incandescent fury at the world out in a paroxysm of unrestrained destruction. It didn't last forever. Channeling that amount of the power was exhausting, and after a while the rage she was blasting out of her was overwhelmed by the despair that stayed sitting in her belly. As the webs faded away, Taija was panting for breath, and her throat felt raw from screaming. Looking around her, all there was as far as the eye could see was destruction. Not a tree was left standing. In some places fire still burnt, but other than the crackles of the flames, the only thing Taija could hear was the harsh sound of her own breath. Anger drained away. She needed to get out of there. She needed to get out of this light-forsaken time. Why couldn't she be home, curled in a ball in tea? She choked off a sob. All she wanted to do was to forget and never have to think again. Taija spun Sedar and the gateway opened in front of her. A second later she was stepping out into Falme. She walked numbly through the streets, barely noticing people snapping angrily at her when she walked straight through them. She was in an unfamiliar part of the town when she saw what she wanted, somewhere to help her forget. The dingy frontage of the inn called to her, and it was promising oblivion. Exactly what she needed. Taija turned into it, ignoring the growl of a roughly dressed man who almost tripped over her. When she walked in, all conversation ceased for a few seconds. The common room's occupants were, other than a couple of serving girls showing a lot of cleavage, all roughly dressed men, many scarred, all armed. She didn't care. Barely aware of her surroundings, Taija went up to the bar and looked at the innkeeper through bleary eyes. Wine, just keep it coming. She put a gold crown down on the counter. He glanced down at the coin and back at her, conscience warring with greed. My lady, perhaps this. Taija put another gold coin down. Wine. Greed won. The innkeeper shrugged behind her, but she'd already turned to head for an empty table at the back of the room, not seeing him make the coins vanish before gesturing at one of the serving girls. By the time Taija had sat herself down with her back to the wall, the girl was already bringing her a full goblet of wine. As soon as she put it down on the table, Taija picked it up and downed it. It was terrible. It was what she wanted. Another. The girl glanced at Taija and back at the innkeeper before heading to get her another. Gradually, conversation resumed across the common room. Low whispers between groups of men, glances shot her way. Confusion turning to avarice. Taija didn't notice, staring into the distance, eyes unseeing as she tried hard not to think. She was waiting for her third goblet when the first two men made their move. Dressed in rough, brown jerkins, they stood up and swaggered over to her table, daggers on their belts and alcohol on their breath. The larger of the two put his hands on the table and leaned over Taija, while the other pulled up a seat at the table beside her. Slowly, she looked up to meet the eyes of the man looming over her. He was a tall man, his lip curled back by a scar from a knife fight, dirty dark hair trailing down his back. You look a bit too high class for a place like this, m'lady. His tone belayed the title. I'm thinking a pretty little thing like you might want to do something for us for protection like. Taija blinked a couple of times. Was he threatening her? Fuck off. He didn't understand the words, but her tone was clear enough. His face darkened and he sneered down at her. You can pay with money or you can pay with your body, but you're gonna pay one way or another. friend, a dank-looking man with piggy eyes, leaned over and grabbed Taija's arm hard enough to bruise. "Don't worry, love. We'll show you a good time." Taija looked blankly down at his hand on her arm for a second, the pain just an irrelevant sensation in the back of her head. Cedar flowed through her, and with a loud crack, the man's arm snapped and bent back, the movement tearing his fingers from Taija as it was ripped backwards. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the smaller man started to scream. The man looming over her grabbed for his dagger. Taija channeled. Air slammed them both backwards across the room, hitting walls with a firm thunk. One was silent, unconscious or dead, she didn't care. The other was screaming. Hard, rough men exchanged glances, and then the whole common room descended into chaos as shouting men scrambled for the exit. It took a second for the ruckus to penetrate Taija's rapidly increasing alcoholic haze, but this wasn't what she wanted. Couldn't this light-forsaken world just leave her in peace for even a measly few minutes? She didn't realize she'd stood until she was screaming, "Will you all shut up and give me some peace?" Air wrapped around an empty table in the middle of the room, flinging it into the air. It slammed into the ceiling as she momentarily lost control of its ascent, and then she crushed it into a ball. Taija sank back into her seat as the inn descended into silence. Ashen-faced men sitting back down wherever they could find a seat, suddenly trying very hard not to be noticed. She gestured at the serving girl. "Another." Chapter 36, How to Forget. Chapter text, chapter Roman 27, How to Forget. Elaine was running through some of the exercises Taija had taught her with Egwene, trying to calm herself down. She'd seen the signs of the battle outside Falme, but Moiraine had told her to wait patiently while she went out to investigate. Surely Taija would be all right. After Falme, she couldn't imagine anything doing much to slow the small woman down, even one of the Forsaken, whatever Egwene had said. However, her best efforts at emptying her mind and focusing were ruined when Alexei burst in, without knocking too. The man was clearly very worked up about something. His face was red, and he was shifting from foot to foot with nervous energy. "Egwene, Elaine, I need your help. Taija needs your help." He burst out as soon as she looked up at him. Instantly alert, she stood, mirrored by Egwene. "Why, what's happened?" As Alexei breathlessly explained, her worry only grew. "There's something very wrong with her. You saw there was a battle. Moiraine and I went to investigate, and she seemed to have won. She was there anyway, and she didn't seem hurt. But when we reached her, she was just kneeling there in the middle of a burnt circle of glass. I called out to her, but she just looked at us, and then she made one of her gateways and vanished." Egwene looked concerned, but Elaine shrugged, putting on her kindest voice. "But Alexei, you know how she is. She vanishes all the time." "Surely you have known her long enough not to worry about that." Alexei seemed to be almost boiling over with frustration, struggling to keep his voice under control. "Yes, of course. But you don't understand, you weren't there. She was just kneeling there, and her eyes, I've never seen her look like that, so defeated." He trailed off, and Elaine exchanged a glance with Egwene. "So you think something's wrong with her?" "Yes, that's what I've been saying." Elaine could see Egwene bristling at his tone, but the poor man was clearly very stressed. "All right, we understand." She shot a warning glance at Egwene. "What can we do to help?" "I think we need to find her, I think. Well, I hope. She's come back to Falme, but even if she's unhurt, we need to make sure. If she's in trouble, well, I know she likes the two of you. She might accept help from the three of us." Elaine couldn't help but consider what that said about some of the other people in Falme. "All right, Alexei, I understand. We'll help you look." Elaine sighed internally and gave him a comforting smile. She didn't really think Taija was likely to be in any difficulty, but it wouldn't hurt to reassure the poor man. Plus, she was bored of the exercises. "We will find Nynaeve. She will want to come too, and then we will go." Egwene sighed audibly, but went to find her overcoat to protect against the cool autumn evening air. Asking people whether they'd seen Taija in the area around the palace had not brought any success, so an increasingly worried Egwene suggested that they strike out further. Falme was not a huge town, and if something was wrong, then Taija might not be around the palace. They quickly set about their search. Asking people on the street, traders and passers-by quickly got them stories of a short, dark-skinned woman wearing men's clothing who had rudely pushed her way down the street without seeming to even acknowledge anyone. Elaine's heart raced. The description matched, but the behavior did not at all. Taija was often rude, but rarely to strangers or deliberately so, more just through lack of understanding. It was increasingly clear that something was wrong. That was why they had a sense of urgency driving all four of them as they followed Taija's trail into worse and worse parts of the town until they came to an inn. It looked exciting. A ragged sign swung in the breeze, and the dingy light from inside barely penetrated the evening gloom on the street. Elaine could see stains up its wooden walls, and she was fairly sure the picture on the sign was something rude, if only she could make it out better in the dim light. In a way, it fit with the area they were in. It did not look at all like the places she was used to visiting. Nynaeve had already threatened to hit several men on the way here, and she was fairly sure the only reason they were not getting more unwanted attention was Alexei and his staff. Even through her suppressed excitement at actually visiting a real inn, Elaine could see that this one was not a particularly welcoming place, but the street trader had been insistent that he had seen Taija going into it. She could see Egwene and Nynaeve's reluctance to even set foot in the place. Alexei looked nervous too. "Come on, we need to go in," she said, trying not to sound too enthusiastic, and pushed open the door. She could not see Taija frequenting a place like this. She had never even seen her drink alcohol, in fact, but it was not like they had anywhere else to try. Something crunched unpleasantly under her shoe when she entered the common room, but the first thing that struck her was the smell. Stale beer, sweat, and more. The place was filthy, disgustingly so, and if she was honest with herself, the clientele looked terrifying. There were even a couple of badly injured-looking men lying against the walls, presumably victims of some barroom brawl. As the others came in behind her, Egwene whispered to her, "Something's wrong, it's too quiet." Elaine opened her mouth to tell her not to be silly and then closed it again. Egwene was right, she realized. She knew how these places were meant to be. Full of raucous men carousing, singing, and maybe brawling. This inn was dead silent, creepily so, not even conversations, just hard men looking towards her, with what she could swear was desperation in their eyes. Dead silent except for quiet sobbing coming from the back. Was that Taija? Elaine took a step forward only to be intercepted by the innkeeper. A portly man with a stained apron, he was wringing his hands together and looked terrified. "Light bless you, my lady. Are you here for the Aes Sedai?" His tone was a frantic whisper, and his eyes pleaded for her to say yes. What in the light had happened here? Thinking quickly, Elaine nodded. "Yes, we are here for her. If you could just—" "Oh, thank the Creator," the innkeeper interrupted. "Please, do not worry, sir." Elaine fumbled in her purse and pressed a couple of gold pieces into his hand. "We will have her out of here." Shooting the others a look, she tentatively headed towards the table that must be Taija's. In the dim light, Elaine could not see her very well until she got closer. The woman was a mess. She was sat on her own at a rough wooden table, an empty goblet in front of her. Her black hair was a complete tangle and with those scorch marks on her overcoat. She was looking down at the table, unaware of the room, her shoulders heaving with quiet sobs. Egwene gasped from beside Elaine and immediately rushed forward, ignoring Elaine's weight. "Taija Sedai, what's wrong? What happened?" Egwene put her hand on Taija's shoulder, concern and fear filling her voice. For what she thought might be the first time ever, Elaine saw the light of Sedar spring up around Taija, a web, wrapping round Egwene's arm before Taija looked up. Bleary, tear-filled brown eyes met Egwene's own, and the web vanished again as quickly as it had appeared. "Oh, it's you. I thought you were someone else." Taija looked back down to her goblet and downed it before waving at the serving girl. "Another." Egwene glanced back to the rest of them, looking confused before trying again. "Taija," said I think you've had enough. Let's get you out of this place. It's not appropriate or safe." Taija waved vaguely at her. "It's perfectly safe. Everyone's lovely here. Anyway, I definitely haven't had enough. I haven't forgotten yet." She raised her voice. "Another." Egwene looked back at them, panic in her eyes. "I think she's speaking the old tongue. I can't understand her." Turning back to Taija, her voice took on a cajoling tone. "Come on, Taija," said I. "Please come with us." Taija's attention swung back to Egwene. The tears seemed to have stopped, but her eyes were still watery, unfocused. "It's not the old tongue, it's the common tongue." She emphasized the name as if speaking to a child. "I don't see why I should put up with you stealing my language's name as well as everything else. You can call your stupid language the new tongue instead." She folded her arms across her chest with finality. "Taija, you're drunk." Egwene pulled gently on her arm. "Come on, please leave." Taija reached up and gently pushed Egwene's hand off her arm. Egwene dear, you're lovely, and I know it's not your fault you don't speak the common tongue, and I don't blame you at all, but I've had enough. I want to speak my own language. Her tone was earnest, like she really wanted Egwene to understand. I've accommodated you people enough. If we can't communicate in a civilized language, then we can't communicate at all. Taija paused in her ramble. Anyway, I'm not drunk. I haven't forgotten yet. Her voice trailed off. Oh, tell why. She started sobbing again. Egwene was left standing there looking completely unsure about what to do. Elaine could hear Nynaeve berating the innkeeper about something behind her, and Alexei looked helpless. It seemed she needed to take control of the situation. Gently she came forward and moved Egwene aside before taking a seat next to the sobbing Taija. She had always done well in her lessons, but trying to talk a drunken Aes Sedai out of an inn in the old tongue was going well beyond them. She took a moment to work out the words in her head. Taija said, Taija, it is okay. We are your friends, and we are worried about you. Come with us to somewhere nicer, and we can talk. Again, Taija looked up. Oh, Elaine, you're here too. She gave her a weak smile. And there's Alexei, such a nice boy. It's nice to hear you speak a proper language. Your pronunciation is wrong and you make grammatical mistakes, but you're at least comprehensible. Not like most of the barbarians in this light-forsaken time. Her face crumpled, and the light of Sedar sprang up around her, a weave of air extending past Elaine's shoulder. Elaine heard a pair of outraged shouts, and turning saw both a jug of what she assumed was wine floating towards the table, pursued by the innkeeper and Nynaeve. The innkeeper came to a sudden halt as he met Taija's eyes and retreated impressively quickly for a man of his size. Elaine wondered what had happened to make him so scared of her. Nynaeve, on the other hand, was made of sterner stuff. Taija, you need to get yourself under control right this instant. Put the jug down and come with us. You're embarrassing yourself and everyone. SHHHH. Taija cut her off. I'm not talking to you unless you use a civilized language. She poured wine into her goblet, slopping a load of it onto the table at the same time. I haven't forgotten yet. Elaine could see Nynaeve was about to explode and hurriedly spoke. See, Taija, this is an inn of poor quality. If we are going home, we have much better wine there. I think Nynaeve is scared here too, so we need to help get her to a safer place. She felt a little guilty for the last sentence, but what Nynaeve couldn't understand couldn't hurt her. Taija hiccuped and took a defiant swig from her goblet. Okay, fine, we can go. This wine really is terrible. I drank better than this when I was an undergraduate, but you promise you have more at home. Elaine nodded. All right, but only because I don't want Nynaeve to be scared. She's a strong girl, but I can still see how scared she is sometimes. Taija stared intently at Nynaeve for a second, as if searching for her fear. Better wine will be good, she muttered, like Tell and I used to drink at the hotel. She started sobbing again, but at least she was getting up. They must have made an odd sight, Elaine mused, as she apologized again to the innkeeper. Taija had nearly fallen over her own feet and was now being half supported, half carried by Egwene and Alexei. Nynaeve was circling them, muttering darkly under her breath, and Taija was rambling something in the old tongue about what a nice boy Alexei was and how lucky it was he'd found her, which didn't seem quite right. Surely Aes Sedai found their warders, not the other way round. As they exited the inn, Elaine glanced behind her one last time, seeing every terrified eye in the room follow them out. What did you say about me? Nynaeve half-whispered, half-hissed to her. Oh, just that you were worried about her, and if she did not come, you would be upset. Elaine covered up a smile. It was awkward walking back through Falmy. Every time they passed, an inn, Elaine had to divert Taija back to their path. Fortunately, she did not seem particularly inclined to, or maybe capable of, heading off on her own. She was still refusing to speak the common tongue, though, pretending not to understand it too, and as they progressed through the streets, her rambling seemed to be growing more and more depressed. I loved him, you know. He was the best thing that ever happened to me. When he smiled, and now, oh, Tell, she started sobbing again. Egwene looked helplessly at her, and Elaine tried to think of what to say. I think she's upset about a man named Tell. She keeps saying how much she loved him. It felt odd saying it right in front of Taija, but she seemed utterly determined not to acknowledge anything not said in the old tongue. Ask her who he is, Egwene whispered angrily. Ah, Taija, who is Tell? She was not sure it was a good idea to ask, but he seemed to be the source of the woman's anguish. Silently, she swore to herself that she would make him pay for breaking Taija's heart, whoever he was. Tell, he was so adorable, such beautiful blue eyes. And then he did this. How could he? The fucking asshole, I'll kill him, heal him, and then kill him again. Taija's voice rose to a crescendo and then broke back into sobbing. What did you say? Hissed Alexei as Taija's wail of anguish broke back into sobbing. I just asked who Tell was. There was another wail at his name. Did you know him? Alexei shook his head. No, how she even had time. Maybe he's from Shara. She turned away before she could see the confused look in Alexei's eyes and gently rubbed Taija's back. It will be all right, Taija. It did not seem to do much to calm her down. Luckily, once they were taking a direct route, it did not take them long to make their way back to the palace and gently wrestled Taija back to her room, ignoring the shocked stares from servants. They quickly got her settled in a chair, still sobbing quietly. Elaine could see that they were all hovering, unsure of how to deal with this. This was not how an Aes Sedai was meant to behave, certainly not how Taija was meant to behave. She poured herself a cup of water and pulled up a chair beside the distraught woman. Maybe she just needed to talk. Everything will be all right, Taija said. Taija mumbled something almost incomprehensible through her sobs, but Elaine took her best guess at what she had said. I know it's not fair. You will feel better in the morning. She took a gulp from her water. This felt like it might be a long night. The poor woman was clearly devastated, although she could not work out why. She had never even mentioned being in relationship with someone named Tell before. Had she been having some kind of liaison in private? Elaine firmly stifled a giggle at the idea of Taija mooning over some lackwit man from Falmy. I loved him, you know. Years of my life. My fiancé just thrown away. Fucking asshole. I am sorry for your loss, Taija. Was he in Shara? Fiancé. What did that mean? Elaine tried to work out Taija's words, making a note of the curses at the same time. It sounded like marriage, but with a suffix for the future, perhaps betrothed. That made sense. It must be somebody from Shara or wherever Taija was from. Taija looked at her through blurry eyes. What's a Shara? We met in Jalanda. Taija, where is Jalanda? She felt a bit bad asking now with the woman in the state that she was, but she needed to know. Maybe knowing would help her help Taija, or so she told herself. Taija reached up and patted her on the cheek. Elaine, you're a sweetheart, if a bit badly behaved at times, but you really should fire your tutors. Jalanda was in the south of Light. They fucked it all up, that prick Luz Thurin, the Shadow, the Hall of the Servants, all of them, breaking the world, ruining everything, and now there's nothing. Elaine gasped. Surely she could not mean. Surely Egwene's ridiculous theory was not the right one. Taija, are you saying you met him in the Age of Legends? Don't call it that. The woman was moving back into anger now, her voice rising. The motherfucking asshole. How could you do this to me, Tell? How could you do it to everybody else? I hope you burn in Shale Gull where you belong. Elaine winced while making more mental notes. Motherfucking was new. She gave a little shiver as she passed it in her head. I am so sorry, but surely you don't mean that, she murmured. He's dead. Taija shook her head. No, I just wish he was dead. I am sure you do not mean that, Taija. The woman really was overwrought. She really could not work out why she was suddenly having a breakdown now. Everything had been going well for her now. Surely nothing could have changed for her, even if Egwene had been right about her, which still seemed faintly ridiculous. If she was betrothed, then it was ancient history. Of course it was sad for her, but triggering this. Perhaps someone had said something to her. Fucking shithole world. How could he? Joining the Forsaken. Fucking Samuel. Elaine had been taking a sip from her water and promptly spat it across the room. Taija did not seem to notice, just ranting on. It's a shit name too. Might as well be Ishmael Light, just like he's turned into Demandred Light. How could I not see it? What the hell was wrong with me? It was at that point that Nynaeve decided to intervene. Nynaeve had had enough of this. She'd taken the time while Elaine tried to comfort the overwrought woman to fill a tub of water in the corner of the room. Elaine had had her chance now, but really she was far too nice for her own good. Trying to talk Taija down, and then indulging her childish refusal to speak the common tongue. Well, predictably that hadn't worked. The woman was as drunk as anyone Nynaeve had ever seen, and frankly it was an embarrassment. Egwene and Alexei were both hovering like useless decorations. She supposed they couldn't help it. Egwene worshipped the woman, and men were never any use in these kinds of circumstances. When Elaine spat her water across the room, Nynaeve decided it was time for the only adult in the room to take over. Taija, don't you want another drink? I've got one for you here. Taija's sobs diminished to sniffles, and she looked up, her refusal to understand the common tongue forgotten. Nynaeve ignored Elaine's frantic gestures to stop, taking one of Taija's arms and hauling her to her feet. The woman was surprisingly light. This would be much easier than with some of the women back in Imin's field. Come on, Taija, just come and sit here and I'll give you your drink. She firmly guided the woman to a stool in front of the tub of water and sat her down. Taija was rambling something in the old tongue, something about Samil. Another point supporting her suspicions about the woman. She wasn't going to take any pleasure from this, but former Forsaken or not, the woman needed to pull herself together. She rubbed Taija's back and moved her hand up to the back of her head. Nynaeve didn't see Elaine's look of abject horror or the sudden movement towards her from Alexei and Egwene as they realized what she was about to do. Now let's get you your drink, Taija. Her voice was comforting. Then she pushed her head straight down towards the cold water. Things happened very fast at that point. Elaine stared wide-eyed at what had just happened in front of her. Nynaeve stood there, frozen in a web of air that wrapped around her arm and body and blocking any sound from her mouth. It had been incredibly fast. One moment Taija's head was descending towards the water, the next the light of Sedar had sprung up around her, and Nynaeve was immobilized, lifted off the floor. Taija looked round at Nynaeve. That wasn't a very nice joke, Nynaeve. Oh, light, she never had a great hold on her temper. The woman was going to explode. Both women would. Elaine started considering which of Taija and Nynaeve she should try to shield when Nynaeve took matters into her own hands. With an outraged gasp, Sedar lit up around her, only to wink out again almost instantly. Nope. Taija casually pushed a shield into place. How strong was that woman? Elaine watched as she levered herself to her feet, swaying slightly to look Nynaeve in the eyes. That hadn't been nice at all of Nynaeve. Now wasn't the time for pranks. Taija was going to get very drunk and then she was going to kill him. Still, she shouldn't make Nynaeve feel bad, though. Taija reached up and pat her on the cheek. I like you, Nynaeve. She paused to think. Words were important. You're good people and I like that about you, but you shouldn't play mean pranks on people. Taija tried to poke her in the stomach, but there was something in the way, blocking her finger. Oh well, she smiled reassuringly at the woman. You're a nice girl, really, Nynaeve, but you need to do some growing up. Why was Elaine coughing? Taija hoped she was okay. She wasn't very good at healing. It's important, though. It's important that. Oh, she wouldn't understand. Taija sighed. She really didn't want to speak their mushy language. It was all mush, mush, mush like mashed potatoes. But it was important. She was a nice girl, but light, she didn't want the poor woman to end up like her, so just for now. It's important to know. Let me give you some advice. You see, I'm old. I've seen you with Lan. He's very, Taija gestured vaguely and nodded. Yes, he's very, and you have to be careful because men. She turned back to Elaine. She still couldn't stop thinking about Tell, however hard she tried. Elaine, I want another drink. I'm going out. You should stay here. You're too young. You too, Egwene. Nynaeve, Alexei, you can come if you want. Elaine exchanged a look with Egwene. Why do you not sit back down, Taija? You look tired. Unfortunately, Taija now had a determined look in her watery eyes. No, I haven't drunk enough yet. I can still remember. I need more to drink and there's none here. She trailed off, biting her bottom lip, and then decisively staggered towards the door. Nynaeve apparently forgot. Alexei ran forward to catch her when she stumbled, but seemed to be more interested in keeping her upright than in persuading her to stay, useless man. Should we try to stop her? Egwene whispered. I do not think we can. Do you want to end up like her? Elaine glanced at Nynaeve, who was trailing along in the air behind Taija like a furious streamer. She could not understand how the woman could hold Sedar like that in her condition, let alone channel effectively. What was she saying? I couldn't understand any of it. Following after Taija in a strange little procession, Egwene took the opportunity to interrogate Elaine. Elaine blanched. She was talking about her betrothed. Light, how could she explain that? Her betrothed. She never mentioned anyone before. All I could understand was her complaining about the Forsaken. That is, she was. There was no way to say it delicately. She was saying she was from the Age of Legends, and her betrothed had become Samil. Egwene gasped. That's not funny, Elaine. I am not joking. It is not funny at all. She was saying she met this Tell before the breaking, and now he is Samil. Ahead of them, Taija was rambling at Alexei, something about how she knew he would never treat a girl that badly and maybe he should. Elaine was fairly sure that suggestion was deeply inappropriate. Egwene's hand pulling on her arm took her mind away from the distraction. Then she said one of the most mature things Elaine had ever heard her say. "Elaine, we can't deal with this. I don't know how to handle someone this drunk, and if it's true, this Samuel," her voice caught on the name, "thing, it's too much. We can't help her like this. I'm going to fetch Moiraine." "You are right. Thank you, Egwene. I will do my best to keep Taija from doing anything foolish until you can get her here." Ahead of them, Taija seemed to have already found an inn, a much nicer one than the last she absently noted. That did not stop the whole common room from descending into dead silence when Taija walked in, trailing Nynaeve in the air behind her. Matt took another bite of the chicken leg. It had been a good night. He'd gotten away from the judgmental stares of the women in the palace, and this inn seemed to be full of people looking to lose money dicing with him. He'd always been lucky, but tonight he only seemed to be able to win. If only he could get away from this town, full of Aes Sedai and Rand. Light burn him, how could he be the dragon reborn? And if his head would stop feeling like dice were rattling around inside it, the night might be perfect. With a grin, he put the thought aside and shook his dice cup, preparing his throw only to stop as he realized silence had fallen over the common room and his table mates were staring wide-eyed over his shoulder. It had better bloody not be the bloody women. He turned to look with a sigh. If he'd known how much worse it was going to be, he'd have dived out the window without hesitating right then. Normally Matt would have found the sight hilarious, but whatever the girls thought, he was no fool. He knew when to keep his mouth shut. As soon as he saw the Aes Sedai, Taija, standing there swaying with a blank stare, her tongue slightly stuck out in concentration, and Nynaeve hanging in the air behind her looking like she might explode any second, he stood from the table, sweeping his winnings into his pouch. If he could just get out before any of them spotted him. Unfortunately, when he stepped away from the table, Taija's eyes zeroed in on him like a hawk. "Oh, you're Rand's friend. I helped heal you, you know. At least there's one good thing I've done. One thing that's not fucked up, that I haven't fucked up." Her voice was slurred. "I didn't want you to know I hate linking, but I still did it for you." Tell would have. Her face crumpled at that, and tears started to trickle down her cheek again. Light, she was completely drunk. He needed to get out of there. He bloody well didn't want to be dealing with a drunk Aes Sedai, let alone with Nynaeve watching. It would end up being his fault, whatever he did. Sketching a bow, he gave his most ingratiating smile to her as he tried to slide past her. "My apologies, Taija Sedai, but I have an urgent errand to attend to." She sniffled and looked over from the spot on the wall she'd been staring at. "You speak the common tongue." A note of hopefulness shot through her tone, and the dice came to a crashing stop in his head. Blood and bloody ashes. This wasn't happening. "I can see you are busy," Taija said. I shall not interfere." Anyway, what was the woman on about? Of course he spoke the common tongue. "No, no, no, Light." The woman was stronger than she looked. Matt found himself being firmly dragged back to his table, the glares of Nynaeve and Elaine following him. Of course, his former gambling partners had already made an exit. In fact, it seemed like most of the people in the inn were discreetly leaving. Helplessly, Matt let himself be tugged back down next to Taija. "You're the only person here who can speak properly. You sound odd, like a farmer, but rich." She squinted at him. "You're not from my time, are you? Will you buy me a drink?" Matt desperately tried to extricate himself from her grasp, looking to Nynaeve and Elaine for help that wasn't coming. "I think you have had enough to drink," Taija said. What did she mean about the way he spoke? He bloody well spoke normally. "Thank you very much. I have not." Her declaration was firm and went against all the evidence. Matt looked more closely at her. Light. The woman was barely holding herself together with those tear streaks on her. "Perhaps Elaine and Nynaeve can sit with." She cut him off. "No, you're a nice boy. You speak properly. Elaine can't help it, but she sounds like a pompous 10-year-old. She looked worried for a second. "Don't tell her I said that. It's not her fault." She paused and then spoke louder. "Elaine, dear, if you can sort out your accent, I'll teach you all the swear words. I've seen you listening." "I'll do it if—" "No, I shouldn't. It would be bad to do that. You're too young. I'd be turning evil like Tell." While he goggled at Elaine, who was staring at them with something between confusion and horror, she reached out and grabbed his cup, taking a big swig. Blood and bloody ashes, he swiped his cup back. "Taija said, I really do think you should stop." She pulled a disgusted face. "That's vile. I want wine. You remind me of a boy I knew that was in a bar after the Blackthorn offensive. He was so sweet, just like you. He asked me out, and I had to tell him I had a boyfriend. Oh, Light. Her face screwed up and she started sobbing again, burying her face in his shoulder. Matt had no idea what to do. Women were bad enough when they cried. He always found it was best to let them get it out and make yourself scarce until they were done. Again, he tried to gently urge Taija off himself while shooting Elaine pleading looks. Of course, there was no help coming from there. Bloody woman, Nynaeve at least had the excuse that she was floating in the air. What were you meant to do? It wasn't just any woman, too, it was a flaming Aes Sedai. He'd heard the stories. Heard about the way she'd expressionlessly murdered her way through half the Sinchen in Falme. He wanted nothing to do with it. Gingerly, he patted her on the back. It will all come out well in the end, Taija said. It won't, it can't, she sobbed into his shoulder. He's not even dead, why isn't he dead? I want him to be dead. I am sure you do not mean that. He desperately kept patting. You are upset now, but it will pass. Not even breaking the heart of a beautiful woman deserves death. Why in the light did he say that? Also, why was Elaine frantically waving at him to stop? What did he do? Taija's voice rose to a wail. He joined the Forsaken. He changed his name to Samuel. How could he? We fought together, we watched friends die. Why couldn't he die too? Why couldn't I die too so I didn't have to see this? I'm stuck in a medieval shithole of a world where everyone hates me, and the one person I love has betrayed everything we stood for. Samuel. Surely not, but suddenly Elaine's frantic gestures made sense. Burn me, and the walls of Manetharan too. Your boyfriend was one of the Forsaken. Taija just wailed more loudly. It was at that point that Egwene ran in with Moiraine, her Aes Sedai composure broken by the worried look on her face, and hastily donned clothing. Just what he needed, another flaming Aes Sedai to make his evening even worse. Then again, maybe she'd be better at dealing with one of her own. The woman's tears were soaking through his coat. Taija said, you need. Moiraine hesitated, reaching out with a small hand to the crying woman. Taija said, I'm so sorry, you need to come with me. We need to get you. To Matt's surprise, her musical voice was gentle and actually sounded sympathetic. He hadn't thought the woman was capable of it. Taija, on the other hand, was not impressed. No, leave me alone. Taija said, please, I just want to help. You've helped enough. Every time I look at you, you remind me of everything wrong with the Aes Sedai of this time. At least Siwyn does something useful. She can solve problems. You just manipulate people, pretending you're better than all of them. Aes Sedai, you think everyone else should be your servant, living off the glory of my people and perverting everything we stood for. Matt jumped when a few of the bottles behind the bar suddenly exploded with a crack. Taija looked dumbly at them for a second and then buried her face in his shoulder again. At the same time, Nynaeve thumped to the ground with an outraged squawk. Go away, Moiraine. I don't want to look at you. You just remind me of everything I want to forget. What was wrong with this woman? Shouting at her fellow Aes Sedai like that. He needed to get away from this before things went more wrong. Light blind the woman for turning up like this. Absently, he rubbed Taija's back. It will be all right, Taija, said I. All will be well in the end. Moiraine turned on her heel and left with Egwene in tow, her face as blank as Matt had ever seen it. Nynaeve seemed to want to throw herself at Taija and beat her with her fists, and with a mental sigh, he prepared himself to get between them. Light, what was he even thinking? Luckily, Elaine stepped in and seemed to be whispering urgently to her. Why was Nynaeve going pale? Taija seemed to have stopped crying again, pulling herself up from his shoulder. He made the mistake of meeting her eyes. They were burning with fury now. He thinks he can do this to me. I won't take it. I've ended better men than him. Her anger was briefly disrupted as she sniffed loudly. I'm going to kill him. I already killed one of them. Asmodean was nothing. He'll be less than nothing when I'm done with him. Asmodean. Taija said, perhaps you should wait a while. He frantically racked his brain for an excuse. Any precipitous action could end badly. Her eyes softened briefly. You're a nice boy, Matt. Don't ever change. They hardened again. No, I won't let him get away with this. I'm going to kill him right now. But you do not know where he is. Matt was quickly running out of excuses. I'll find him. Come on, you're coming with me. You're nice, and you can find me another drink afterwards. She looked over at Nynaeve and Elaine. Not you two, though. You complain too much, Nynaeve, and you're too young, Elaine. Oh, Light, she was standing up. She actually meant it. A wavering hole seemed to appear in the air, slicing a table in half to a brief scream from Elaine, who'd been standing nearby. Matt did the only thing he could think of. Taija, we should have another drink first. I think you could do with one. She paused in her efforts at getting up, looking thoughtful, and the hole in the air vanished. You're right, I do want another drink. She patted him on the cheek. You really are a nice boy, go buy me one. I'll pay you back. Tentatively, Matt got up, wondering if he should make a run for the door, but under Taija's drunken gaze his feet took him to the bar. Burn her, he couldn't just leave her to whatever Nynaeve would do to her if he left. What are you doing? Hissed Nynaeve to him. You can't be getting her more drink, look at her. Well, one thing he'd already had enough of was flaming women, let alone Aes Sedai lecturing him, and Nynaeve was close enough to being both. I'm trying to save her bloody life, is what I'm doing, and mine with it, he hissed back, while grabbing a bottle from behind the bar. She's saying Samuel's broken her heart, and she wants to go and kill him now, in her state. What would you rather? That she tries to jump through one of her holes in the air to fight one of the bloody Forsaken, or that she drinks until she passes out? That seemed to take the wind out of Nynaeve's sails, and so he found himself coming back to the table and sitting down beside Taija again, letting her grasping hand take the bottle off him so that she could gulp some down. After a moment, he took the bottle back from her and took a deep pull of his own. He needed it. Taija seemed to have calmed down a bit, sitting there silently staring at the wine bottle. Still, when she reached for it and took another gulp, he wondered whether he should try to stop her. Taija said, maybe you should get to bed now. I think you have had a long day and everything will look better in the morning. No, I need to be precisely drunk enough that I forget. I haven't forgotten yet. Then I'll just travel home. What little composure she had wavered. Oh, light, I can never go home again. This time, instead of bursting into tears, she visibly made an effort to master herself. Actually, I think I'm too drunk to travel. Can you call me a taxi in an hour or so? What in the light was a taxi? She reached into her blouse, and for a second Matt was terrified he'd need to look away. He was always up for a kiss and a cuddle, but letting his eyes wander with a drunk Aes Sedai, he might as well just string himself up by the heels for Nynaeve. Luckily, Taija just pulled out her necklace, with the pendant in her hand. See this? It's an angrial, very useful thing, really. Matt heard Elaine gasp in the background and whisper to Nynaeve. The important thing is, though, it's from a dancer. She dropped her tone conspiratorially. That's where I was born. That's why it's important. It's all that's left of there. 3,000 years just gone. 5 million people, poof. She dropped the pendant and it fell to dangle outside her blouse. She reached out and took another swig from the bottle and then held it up in confusion. It was already empty. Taija sighed. The service in this bar isn't very good. Maybe I should buy it. I don't want to be a soldier anymore. I could run away and own a bar. I think I'm rich. Am I rich, Matt? Before he could answer, she continued on, muttering, compound interest for 3,000 years. I must be rich. She raised her voice again. Elaine, you're rich. You're a princess. Where's the nearest branch of the Jalanda Central Bank? Matt could already see her mind moving to the next step, which he just knew would be crying about this Adanza place no longer existing. Desperately, he said the first thing that came to mind, giving her his best roguish grin. Another drink, Taija said. That did distract her. Young man, are you trying to get me drunk? She gave him a sideways look. No, you're far too nice. More drink, please. As Matt got up from the table, Elaine gave him another look that promised retribution and hurried over to sit down, taking Taija's hand. Nynaeve seemed to have retreated to the corner to stew. At least she wasn't trying to involve herself. Wished Rand or Perrin was here. They knew how to talk to women. As Matt returned to the table, another bottle in hand, he heard Elaine talking urgently in a low tone to Taija. Taija said, please stop drinking. I know you're hurt, but you're only going to regret it in the morning. Taija gave the girl a long look, and for a second Matt paused, thinking with growing relief that she might actually agree. Then something, the power, grabbed the bottle from his hands, and he watched it fly over to Taija's waiting hand. She took a swig. I'm 180-ish years old, 3180. She seemed to lose track of her thoughts, and Matt took the opportunity to grab the bottle and drink some himself. Anyway, I know things. I've seen the way you look at young Rand. You should do something about that. He's a nice young man, and you're both so tense. She paused, and Matt wondered if she was about to pass out, and then she leaned into Elaine, but completely forgot to change the volume of her voice. I think you should get him alone and ride him dry. Matt spat his mouthful of wine across the table, and Elaine flushed bright red in embarrassment. Don't worry about that Ming girl, you're a princess and a redhead. Men love redheads. Just don't fall in love with him. They break your heart. She trailed off, lost in thought, as Elaine spluttered for words. He was going to regret this in the morning. It would be his fault somehow. Taija Sedai, that is incredibly inappropriate. How could you say that? Rand and I are. You people are so backwards. Stuffy, high noses. Taija turned her nose up. It's not how an Aes Sedai should be. Is it because you don't have contraception nowadays? What does contraception mean? Elaine asked in a tone that said she knew she'd regret asking. Taija sighed. Of course you don't have it, but it's easy. She bit her bottom lip and crossed her eyes. You just need to spin spirit, air, and fire over you. She was interrupted by Elaine's shriek of stop, and subsided back into mumbling to herself before groping for the bottle. Just make sure he doesn't betray you. Oh, tell. Her face crumpled again, and Matt found himself with his arm round her while she sobbed into his shirt. After a while, she looked up, cheeks tear-stained. Do you think it was my fault? Did I make him do it? Before he could answer, she shook her head angrily. No, the bastard. I'm not going to go blaming myself for it. No, you should not blame yourself. He took another swig and gave her a comforting squeeze. Do you think he was planning it all even before? He was in charge for the Tuvian massacre, was that him? Her voice dropped to a whisper. What in the light was he meant to say to that? No, I am sure he did not. Luckily, she wasn't really listening. The bastard. He spat on everything we stood for. Everything. And now I'm alone in this light-forsaken time, surrounded by peasants who can't even speak properly. Not you, Matt. You're okay. Matt thought the evening might be starting to calm down when the person he probably least wanted to see walked into the inn, looking red-faced like she'd been in a hurry. Taija looked up when she came in. Oh, hello, Siwan. I suppose you can stay and have a drink because you're sad too, but I don't want to talk to you so you can sit over there. I'm only talking to Matt tonight. Oh, and Elaine, she's okay too. He winced and waited for the explosion. Siwan had not been having a good day. Wrestling Aes Sedai into doing what she wanted was worse than herding cats, and setting up her own rebel tower was harder work than being the uncontested Amulin had ever been. She had been looking forward to finally getting a good night's sleep when Moiraine and young Egwene had burst in. Moiraine was looking more flustered than she had seen the woman in the decades since they obtained the shawl, in fact. Siwan, you need to come to Falme immediately. The near panic in Moiraine's voice brought her instantly back to full alertness. Why, what is going on? You look like you have barely escaped a mauling by a school of Silverpike, Moiraine. Despite her question, she was already getting dressed. Taija. Oh, light, of course it was. That woman was either the greatest blessing or the greatest curse the Creator had seen fit to bestow on her. She is drunk, very, very drunk. Siwan slowed her preparations. And I do not see why this requires me to give up my sleep. It is not just that she is drunk, but the reason for it. Egwene jumped in. Mother, she's having some kind of breakdown over her betrothed. She's with Elaine and Nynaeve and Matt, but we don't know what to say to her. She just won't stop crying and drinking. When did she have time to get betrothed? That woman was going to be the death of her. She should learn to control herself. Not now, Mother, her betrothed from before. She fought a battle with someone outside Falme, and when she came back, she just started drinking and won't stop. She keeps talking about Tell, and I know it sounds insane, but I think is Samuel. Mother's milk in a cup. The words came out before Siren could stop them. She immediately shot Egwene a look that promised dire punishment if she ever spoke of it. Why are you not there with her, Moiraine? The woman actually looked embarrassed. She refused to speak to me, just shouted at me to get out. It seems she does not approve of me. I thought she might at least speak to you. Siwan sighed. I suppose I must go at once then. We cannot leave her with those children. Who knows what will happen if we do? She turned for the exit. Come, Egwene. Moiraine, please take us to the inn. With the ability to travel thousands of leagues in a single step, it did not take long before she reached the inn. Leaving Moiraine outside, Light knew what that woman had done to upset Taija so much. Siwan went straight in. The common room was almost silent. It seemed everyone had fled. There was only Nynaeve sitting off to one side, looking like she wanted to chew bricks, while Alexei tried to talk to her and young Matt, and Elaine sitting at a table with a sniffling Taija. With an internal sigh, she put on her gentlest face and went to join them, mentally warming up her knowledge of the old tongue. It was clear that Taija was very drunk and very upset. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, and her look was bleary. One of the two young idiots seemed to have been supplying her with more wine too, she realized, when Taija took a distinctly unladylike swig from an open bottle before looking over at her and telling her to sit somewhere else. The nerve. A gesture summoned Nynaeve and Elaine over to her to join Egwene, leaving Taija just with Matt, who seemed to be talking to her in the old tongue. Since when had Matt been able to speak the old tongue? Was he not a farmer? Panic spiked in her. Surely he was not one of them in disguise, too. If he was, there was nothing she could do not now. Later. What is wrong with her? She is beyond drunk, she whispered to them, casting glances over at the table. Egwene gave her an exasperated look that was certainly unsuitable for a novice, speaking to the Amulin, and whispered, I told you, mother. She thought that her betrothed was dead until today, when she seems to have found out that he survived because he became one of the Forsaken. It just did not seem believable, but at this point, she just wanted the woman in bed and to be back in her own. Surely this was a job she could delegate to someone. Very well, we can overwhelm her and force her to bed until she sobers up. We can't, Egwene started to protest, but Elaine spoke over her. Mother, Elaine sounded more hesitant to challenge her. We already tried to force her to sober up, and Nynaeve ended up shielded and trailing behind her like an ornament for the best part of an hour. Unless you are entirely confident that you can stop that, it might be better not to. Well, that explained why Nynaeve was as red as a sandfish. She was left watching helplessly as that woman rambled to Matt in the old tongue. She hated feeling helpless. I thought Tell was dead, like everyone else. She looked like was about to burst into tears again, but managed to continue. I fought a man, only it was Tell he was alive, and I was so happy, but he had a scar and he ran away, and I knew, oh light I knew, but Mirren told me. SS she told me he was Samuel. Who was Mirren? Was that what she called Lanfear? I know, it is terrible, he replied, his face begging them to come and help. You're not one of my undergraduates, are you? You're very young. If you're an undergraduate, I could be in trouble. I am not an undergraduate, do not worry. What in the light was an undergraduate? No, of course not. They're all dead, it's all gone. I blew up the physics faculty. She sniffed. I'm a soldier now. I don't want to be a soldier, she sobbed into his chest. I just want to be a physicist and play sports with Tell. Why do I have to do this? Why does the world make me do this? Her sobbing got louder. The fucking shadow ruined everything. Why? For what? And now it's stolen Tell from me. Her voice rose to a wail, and Matt murmured comfortingly, his accusing eyes staring at them over her shaking shoulder. There, Taija Sedai. It will be all right. It's not all right. It'll never be all right. He's betrayed me and everything we stood for. I'm stuck here with no one at all, and now this. I wish he'd died, and I wish I'd died too. I'm going to kill him and every other one of the Forsaken. Chosen, I'll show them what they've been chosen for. I'm gonna, her voice trailed off. Taija was completely drunk, wary beyond anything she'd ever drunk before. Matt was such a nice boy, though. He was the only one that really understood her. Not emotional shit. She had enough of that already, but like literally understood her speak a civilized language. She'd have to keep him, at least until she'd murdered Tell and made herself feel better. How could he do that to her? He was dead, and she was alone, and now SH was even more along. The fucking bastard, she was GNNA murder him. Made then Murin and San WLD leave her there, and she CD go and do thines. WNT that be NC gong and ding THNGSYs. Taija was emotionally and physically exhausted. At that point, she just couldn't deal with things anymore, and the fact that she drunk far, far more than she could handle didn't help. However hard she tried, she just couldn't forget. Her thought processes trailed off as she fell asleep on Matt, finally achieving oblivion, unaware of the trail of drool that she left dribbling down his shirt. Chapter 37. Interlude Roman 9. You were loved, and you will be remembered Roman 2. Chapter text Interlude Roman 9. You were loved, and you will be remembered Roman 2 approximately 3,000 years ago. Tell stood in the grassy field, staring empty-eyed into the distance. She wouldn't have wanted this to be here. Taija would have wanted to be in the mountains. The seven-spoked wheel had been carved into the grass, a candle placed in the middle of it. He didn't know who by. The expediencies of the war limited what could be done. A few other mourners stood behind him. She had no family left, Lanfear had seen to that. The woman's mad grudge culminating in yet another thing he didn't want to think about. Antiro had died with her, of course. There were just a few soldiers, comrades who'd fought beside her, and one or two officials. Sailor was there too, quietly sobbing at the back. He appreciated her coming when she was already mourning her own husband. He'd also been there when she'd said the words for Entiro. Finally, a couple more of her friends, they'd had kind words for him. Of course, there were more people out there, so many who'd known or cared about her, but everyone else was either dead or locked in place by the war. Even he'd had to fight to make time to be here. Tell knelt down in front of the wheel, head bowed, unable to stop the tears from rolling down his cheeks. With her ancestors and siblings gone and no descendants, the duty fell to him to end the ceremony. Go peacefully into the night, Taija Kosola Murinen. May the light of the Creator bless your soul, and may you soon be reborn to live again. You are loved, and you will be remembered. He just about managed to stop his voice from breaking as he said those final words. He needed to set an example. The whole front relied on him holding it together. He couldn't start sobbing, couldn't let his shoulders start to shake when the others solemnly repeated, "You were loved, and you will be remembered." He stayed kneeling as the other mourners slowly dispersed, giving him the privacy that he needed for his own last words. "I'm sorry, Taija. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. Maybe I could have saved you. Instead, I did my duty and now you're dead. I told them we needed reinforcements. I told them again and again, but they never came. All reserves were needed for the Salaxian front. They had a great victory there. Luz Thurin beat back the shadow again." He laughed bitterly. The man had sent him a message of condolences, kinder words than he expected, but empty nonetheless. "They told me it was Ishmael, intervening directly to break our lines. Why were you always so brave? Why didn't you run? You couldn't beat someone like him. You should have run." His hands clenched at his trousers. "If only I'd been there too. I'm trying to fight on. I know the light needs me. I know it's what you'd have wanted, but I don't know if I can do it. I love you, and the world is so empty without you." His voice cracked. "Everything I see reminds me of you, your smile, the look in your eyes, every moment we spent together. I know I need to press on. I need to keep pushing in the hall and with the rods of dominion, but I don't know if I can. Without you, the whole world seems grey. Sometimes they just make me so angry and I want to burn it all down. I know I can't. I know the people need me. However corrupt, weak, or indecisive their leaders are, I know I need to go on, that I can't just leave them all to be slaughtered by the shadow, but I hate it. I hate it so much. You were my foundation, you held me together. I need you, and all I can think about is that madman Ishmael laughing over your corpse while I pray to an uncaring creator that you didn't suffer." He scowled. "I promise you this. I will kill him. I will make it slow and painful, and when I do, I'll tell him you sent me. Without you, I feel so empty. There's no happiness, no laughter, no smiles left. I know an Aes Sedai never gives up, but without you, it's so hard." He paused, just staring into the candle's small flame, trying not to think of her dark eyes shining up at him. Tell wasn't sure how long he knelt there before an aide came hurrying up to him, apologetic, but insistent that he was needed at headquarters. With an effort of will, Tell pulled himself together and got up from his knees. He took a last look at the flickering candle and muttered the final words, "You were loved, and you will be remembered." He turned away, face hard, already spinning a gateway back to his headquarters, and stepped through it. Back to the war. Then there was only a small flame left, flickering on top of the seven-spoked wheel in an empty field. Yet another hero of the light, soon to be forgotten. The present-day Samuel stared up at the ornately painted ceiling above his huge bed. His plans were progressing well. The great lord's victory would be inevitable, and once he was Niblis, he would be able to shape the world as he desired. Make it the way it should be. So why was it that when he closed his eyes, all he saw was her face, looking up at him, denial on her lips and despair painted across it? Of course he was shocked, thrown off his game. He prided himself on his self-awareness, and he could admit that. Who wouldn't be? But it had been years. He'd moved on, the world had moved on. She was an anachronism, a relic of a failed system, a memory of a failed earlier life. He considered, not for the first time, maybe he should try to turn her. She'd understood him, understood what he'd been trying to do and the problems that penetrated to the heart of the light. She'd always been the optimistic one, but if he could make her see the truth. The dysfunction of this time was in many ways even more obvious. She'd met so-called Aes Sedai, she must see that. For all her foolish love for the Aes Sedai philosophy, it wasn't like she'd had much patience for fools. He didn't have space left in him for love, but it seemed he still remembered it. So he'd offer her a chance, in memory of what they once had. If she didn't take it, well, then he'd leave her to the others. She was a dangerous woman, but she had her flaws. Lack of interest in politics, clever in so many ways, and yet so blind when it came to strategy, a sense of duty that forced her into making worse and worse mistakes. He'd seen Falmy, impressive, but if the slightest thing had gone wrong, she'd have been dead, or worse, a damning. She'd alienate the wrong people, make too many missteps, gradually get herself into more and more situations she couldn't handle, and then she'd be dealt with. Yet another hero of the light, soon to be forgotten. Chapter 38. No one likes apologizing. Chapter Roman 28. No one likes apologizing. When Taija woke up, the sun was shining through the curtains to her room. She wasn't certain what time it was, but given the time of year, she was pretty sure it was well into the day. Consciousness returned slowly. Fighting. Tell alcohol, oh light. Her memories of last night weren't totally clear, but she remembered enough to be horrifically embarrassed. She'd gone and insulted almost every person she liked, and some she didn't. Taija was no modern Aes Sedai, but she still had a sense of dignity, and she drunk that into submission before going on to trample all over it. While Taija could, unfortunately, vaguely remember most of the night, some things were a little odd. She wasn't totally sure, but she thought she'd passed out in that bar, possibly on young Matt. Fuck. However, now she was in her own bed in her shift. She didn't think anything had happened, thank the light, but still, humiliation burned inside her. Honestly, Taija would have preferred some proper pajamas, but it was better than trapping some poor boy under her while she drooled on them. Because of course she'd have drooled on him. Tell told her she always drooled when she fell asleep after drinking. Tell, with an effort, Taija stopped her thoughts from descending into a downward spiral. There were things she needed to do. She could process this later. If she let herself stop to think for too long, she might end up back in an inn again. Once was inexcusable, ending up like that again would be unbearable. Taija started moving, preparing herself for the pain of climbing out of bed. She wasn't a big drinker, but there had been other occasions in the past. But to her surprise, she felt fine. In fact, she felt better than fine, at least physically. Well rested, refreshed as if she'd had a fantastic night's sleep, not a night of deliberately drinking herself to the point of passing out to avoid thinking about moving on. It didn't take her long to get dressed and perform her morning ablutions, and then she headed out. She had things that she needed to do. The first order of affairs was to find the girls. Taija couldn't remember everything, but she was rude to all of them. Nynaeve in particular, an image of her trailing along behind her wrapped in air flashed through her mind. The woman had already suffered enough. Taija knew Nynaeve wrapped her dignity around her to help hold herself together, and then she went and did that to her. There was no excuse. She wanted nothing more than to disappear, open a gateway to somewhere isolated, and never have to show her face. Nevertheless, she left her room to seek them out. What was it Rand said? Duty was heavier than a mountain, and death was lighter than a feather. Sometimes it did feel that way. Her first stop was the two adjoining rooms occupied by Elaine and Egwene. Taija hated having to apologize. The embarrassment of her loss of control made her cheeks burn, but nevertheless, she tentatively knocked on one of the doors. A few seconds later, a slightly guilty-looking Egwene opened it, Elaine looking out from behind her. Taija only got a brief moment to wonder what she'd been doing. Taija said She cut Egwene off. She'd thought about how to do this. In her time, there were many formal ways to apologize, letting her carefully calibrate exactly how ashamed she was and how much of an obligation she owed the recipient of the apology. Here, she'd just have to do her best translation. Taija bowed low at the waist, almost horizontal, the kind of bow she'd only give at the most formal of occasions or the most humiliating of missteps. Egwene, Elaine, my behavior last night was unacceptable and an embarrassment. She started to straighten to meet their eyes. I apologized from the bottom of my H. She was cut off as something thumped into her, nearly knocking her over. Arms wrapped round her, and then Elaine followed a second later, the two of them squeezing her tightly, both of them talking over each other. It's all right, Taija said Please don't apologize, we're just worried about you. Are you all right? We're so sorry. How could anyone do that to you? Please don't run away and try to kill Samuel. You must be so lonely. I'll learn the old tongue. Elaine started teaching me. Taija found herself reassuring Elaine and Egwene that she wasn't angry with them or going to do something stupid. Why were they crying? This really wasn't how she'd seen this going. Teenagers. It took her a while, but eventually Taija extricated herself from their grasps with a combination of reassuring and apologetic words. I need to find the others and apologize to them too. She gave them her teacher look. And I said I must always take responsibility for his or her actions. I'll be back later for your lessons, but for now, she sighed and rubbed her forehead, I need to live up to the title. Taija didn't give them time to protest. We can talk more later, but first, please could you tell me where Nynaeve is? It seemed her guess that they'd know where she was right. Both looked a bit awkward before Egwene spoke up. I think she's on the North Beach practicing, but Taija said, please don't judge her too much if she's a bit prickly. She's a stubborn woman. Why would I judge her? I'm going to apologize to her, not the other way round. I know Nynaeve well, and she can say things she doesn't really mean. Egwene looked nervous. I know she doesn't really hate you. She'd be furious if she finds out I told you. But you know she helped us get you to bed, and it was her that healed you. She might not show it, but she feels terrible for you. She understands why you got how you did. Maybe the modern world wasn't such a bad place after all. Taija traveled out to the North Beach. It was easy to find Nynaeve there. The light of Sedar was glowing brightly around her. For someone with so little training, she was impressively strong. One day, a day not too long from now probably, she'd match Taija for strength, and then she'd just keep on growing. She still spun like a barely tutored child, though. Nynaeve didn't notice her at first as she stood there, her body language radiating tension and anger while she crudely spun web after web, muttering to herself as she did. Eventually, Taija coughed gently. Nynaeve jumped, and the light of Sedar vanished from around her as she whirled to face Taija. She'd have to make sure Nynaeve didn't turn that into a habit, releasing Sedar like that could get her killed. Taija, said I. Her voice was flat. Taija winced. This wouldn't be as easy as with the girls. Nynaeve, Taija pulled herself together, hiding behind ritual. Again, she bowed low at the waist, almost horizontal. My behavior last night was unacceptable and an embarrassment. She straightened up and met Nynaeve's eyes. I apologize from the bottom of my heart for it. I have lowered my eyes under the light, and I beg your forgiveness for it. I was under a lot of stress, but that does not excuse the way I treated you. Nynaeve looked Taija over for a couple of seconds, her face expressionless, then she relaxed a little. Thank you, Taija, said I. I appreciate it. I accept your apology. I realize you must not have been yourself. Her expression tightened briefly. Please do not do that again. Self-control is vital for a channeler of your strength. Without it, you can hurt people without meaning to. Sometimes you have to set an example. Taija didn't like being lectured by Nynaeve, especially given the hypocrisy of her talking about self-control, but she wasn't going to taint her apology by saying that, so she listened and nodded at appropriate moments. By the end of her lecture, Nynaeve clearly felt better about the world in general and Taija in particular. Her body language was more relaxed and her face less tight. I'll see you for class this afternoon, Taija, said I. She phrased it halfway between a question and a statement. Yes, I look forward to it. After last night, Matt had had enough of Aes Sedai for several lifetimes. He took a gulp of ale. Oh, he could admit that Taija wasn't bad as Aes Sedai went. Unlike the others, she didn't pretend to be the next thing down from the Creator and didn't walk around with her nose in the air all the time. She wasn't bad on the eye too, not a beauty, but pretty enough. If she wasn't an Aes Sedai, he might even have thought about a dance and a cuddle as it was, when you looked into her eyes. Well, he had more bloody sense than that. At least he'd managed to persuade her out of going and killing her betrothed, one of the flaming Forsaken, and wasn't that insane? Burn him if he was going to be involved in that. Falme was really getting to be too much for him. Too many eyes, said I here, and then there was Rand, the dragon reborn. It didn't make any sense, and he certainly didn't want to be around when Rand went mad and killed everyone. Elaine had told him that Taija and Moiraine were both looking for him, and so he'd made himself scarce. They might have their Aes Sedai tricks, but he was good at hiding from angry women, and he didn't think they'd be willing to troop round Falme's inns looking for him. He took another gulp of ale and looked around for another dice game. If he was going to leave Falmy, he'd need enough money to tide him over. Maureen sat brushing her hair. It had been an eventful time, even by recent standards. Thinking about Taija's rant at her was painful. The woman had clearly been suffering. She could only imagine the pain she must have been in, but to lose control of yourself like that. It was not just that it was embarrassing, it also brought into question the very nature of being Aes Sedai. The composure and self-control that being one of the most powerful women in the world required. If you could not be trusted to keep yourself under control like that, then how could you be trusted to wield power that even kings and queens could only dream of? Then today the woman had come and apologized. Moiraine could tell the apology was given through gritted teeth, carefully worded to obfuscate the fact that she had meant every word and only regretted saying them out loud. She had spent enough time in the tower and around far more sophisticated players of the great game to see straight through word games of that kind. Still, if there was one thing Moiraine could not see, it was Taija running off to join her betrothed. In a world full of uncertainty and threats, that was one relief. Siuan was not sure, but she had her reasons for paranoia. Moiraine was confident. That did not mean there were no problems, of course. The woman had far too much influence over Rand, and she seemed to be spreading her tentacles into the girls too. In a better time and place it would not matter. Moiraine did believe that she only had the best of intentions, but here and now she was going to get them killed with her foolish ideas. She might be an ancient Aes Sedai from the Age of Legends, and she certainly had the knowledge and power to back that up, but Moiraine doubted she would even have obtained the shawl in the White Tower. The woman was not equipped for the Third Age. Too soft, too flighty. Unfortunately, there was little she could do about it. Any overt action risked alienating Taija, which would be bad enough, but it also risked alienating Rand and the girls, which would be utterly disastrous. She would just have to deal with it, as she had to deal with every other problem the pattern threw her way. The dragon reborn must survive, and he must succeed. The days in Falmy dragged on. Taija was working hard to keep herself busy, not giving herself a moment to think. She continued the girls' lessons, and their progress was fast. Pleasingly, Alexei had also been keeping himself busy. When she had the mental space, Taija felt twinges of guilt for the way he dragged himself away from everything he knew, seemingly just to follow her. Regardless, he seemed to have struck up an odd friendship with Rand and Lan, and they spent long hours practicing various forms of fighting. Taija could only hope Lan wasn't rubbing off on them too much. He was far too grim. Trying to fill her time, she also talked to people around Falmy and learnt more about the world and the people who'd sworn themselves to follow a teenage boy. She even assisted in reconstruction efforts around the town, channeling to move rubble and rebuild some of the destruction caused by the battle that raged through it. When Taija didn't have anything to occupy her, she traveled to somewhere isolated and trained. Sprinting, blowing things up, experimenting with webs. All of that meant that every night she fell into her bed too exhausted to think, and it was exactly what she wanted. Elaine wasn't yet strong enough to make a useful gateway, but that would come. The other two could actually travel now, although Taija had refused to teach them the full web until they were able to recite the 5 basic safety principles back to her word for word without the slightest hesitation. More disturbing was Rand. Since the Battle of Falmy, he'd been becoming more and more withdrawn. He was clearly feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. His body language, the way he spoke, the haunted look in his eyes, they all told Taija of someone who was starting to crack. She was fairly sure he'd been trying to avoid her, but he was easy enough to find when she wanted to, unlike Matt. "What's up, Rand?" The poor boy was clearly brooding again. He looked at Taija in confusion until she clarified. "I mean, how are you? What's going on?" He sighed. "Too many things. How can I do this? Everyone making demands, wanting things from me. People dying in my name, half the West on fire over what? Me? Ah, right." She nodded sympathetically. "That sucks." He looked confused again. "That's terrible. We're going for a walk." Without giving him the chance to argue, Taija spun a gateway and stepped through it. "Come on, Rand." Hesitantly, he followed her, looking around at the trees now surrounding him with a hint of confusion. "Where are we? Why did you bring me here?" "We're in a forest," Taija smiled, ignoring his unamused scowl. "I brought you here because you need to get away. Here we can walk and we can talk with no one to bother us. When I need to get away from everyone and everything, I find it relaxing to do this." Maybe one day you'll be able to too. Rand scowled harder. If I ever learn to control the power. I try to embrace it, and it slips through my fingers more times than I succeed. Even when I can hold it, I can't make it do what I want half the time. Sometimes I try as hard as I can and nothing happens. Other times I hold it, but then I channel and everything goes wrong. Sooner or later I'm going to hurt or kill someone. Then there's how it feels. Every time I touch it, I want more. It feels like being truly alive. But at the same time, I feel sick and disgusted. By the end of that, his voice was raised, his breath harsh. Taija gave his arm a comforting pat. Why didn't you tell me this before, Rand? I might have been able to help. She thought it might be the first time he'd actually talked to her about channeling. Rand shrugged and didn't meet her eyes. You've been upset. Egwene told me why, and I just didn't want to bother you or do anything that might remind you of, you know. He trailed off awkwardly. Light bless earnest teenage boys. Rand, you're a nice boy, but you don't need to worry about me. I'll be fine. Whatever problems you have, I'll help you with them if I can. Taija resisted the urge to tell him that was what adults were for, that never went down well with young men or women. It's not like you can help me anyway. Moiraine already told me. Sedar and Sedin are different. A woman cannot help a man learn to channel. She said a fish might as well teach a bird to fly. Taija smiled faintly at that. Moiraine is a very intelligent woman, but she doesn't know as much as she thinks she does. She's not completely wrong. There are limits. I can't see or feel how you channel. I certainly can't teach you how to spin webs. However, I do understand the basic principles of how a man channels, and those I can explain to you. How do you know that? I know you know more than Moiraine, but you're still a woman. A proper education. She felt a flash of irritation and loss that she ruthlessly suppressed. In my time, every channeler had to undergo basic education, sort of like the White Tower, but more formal, more organized. Part of that was channeling theory, understanding the basics of the way the power works for both men and women. Her voice took on a more distant tone. Also, we talked. You understand the world wasn't like it is now, broken and dysfunctional. Men and women worked together, learnt together, cooperated. I had male friends who were Aes Sedai. I had lovers who could channel. Taija ignored him, choking next to her. These people were really very conservative. She also carefully didn't mention Tell. We talked, especially when we were young. Channeling was new, so exciting, and we wanted to talk about nothing else. Taija hauled herself out of her reminiscence with a sigh. Anyway, it was a different world. So, tell me, what do you do when you want to hold the power? He hesitated. My father, Tam, taught me something called the flame and the void. I imagine a flame flickering in my head, and then I feed everything, all my emotions and feelings, everything into it. When I've done that, I sometimes feel Sedin at the edge of the void, and I try to open myself to it, like Egwene described from her lessons. Well, there's your first mistake. Taija gave him a gentle smile. I've never heard of this flame and the void, but the principles sound familiar. All channelers have a meditative technique to open their minds to the power. Egwene and Elaine imagine themselves as flowers opening to the power. I visualize a beach with waves lapping at it. It sounds like yours does the job for you too. However, your mistake is trying to imitate Egwene. Sedar and Sedin are fundamentally different. Women embrace Sedar. We have to accept it and guide it rather than try to impose ourselves on it. Men are the opposite. You need to seize Sedin, take control and dominate it, otherwise you'll never be able to use it properly, if at all. Taija kept talking, gently lecturing Rand about the basics of channeling for men. As ever, he listened carefully, taking in her words intently. She hoped she could at least teach him enough not to kill himself. If Taija was honest, she was a bit nervous telling him anything. It's not that she didn't want to help, but most of what she told him came from half-forgotten classes and late-night conversations with dreamy young men during her teens. As for trying to actually help someone who was learning to channel without a teacher, well, Taija thought they called them wilders nowadays, but there wasn't even a word for them in her time. They were so rare. All she really knew was a half-remembered statistic that learning to channel by yourself had a fatality rate of well over 75%. Teaching Rand helped to fill Taija's time, but some things still brought back painful memories. Both Rand and the girls were sensitive about asking her too much about the past. She tried not to show it, but she was fairly sure they could see the pain in her eyes. Nevertheless, the topic came up sometimes. How do you become an Aes Sedai, Taija Sedai? Elaine hesitated. I mean in your time. I know there are tests nowadays, although they are kept secret, but you're kind of Aes Sedai. Taija paused in a demonstration of how to twist a web of illusion to provide camouflage, thrown off a bit by the question. Well, it was both simple and difficult at the same time. What does that mean? Nynaeve sounded unimpressed by the answer. Taija shot her a look. It was simple because in theory all you had to do was have a panel of 3 Aes Sedai decide that you were worthy of the title. It was complicated because to get a panel to agree you had to prove yourself in various ways. So like the tests now? No, not really. I don't know exactly what's involved now, but it wasn't a test. It was more showing that you were worthy of calling yourself a servant of all. She thought back to her own panel. She'd only been 22, considered very young to apply for the title. A man and 2 women sat on the raised platform, long, formal overcoats with high collars showing their status as Aes Sedai. Taija could remember how impressed she'd been at the Golden Globes on the collar of the panel chair's black coat, showing she had earned her 3rd name. You had to submit her. She searched for the right word and couldn't quite find it. A list of what you had done to contribute to society. You also had to survive an interview in which they'd question your actions, attitudes, and moral outlook. Taija pursed her lips. If I'd gone in with the sort of attitude that I said I nowadays have, I'd probably have failed immediately. There was a lot more emphasis placed on the serving part of the title, but having it was a great honor. One most channelers sought in my day, even if it took them a century to get there. So any channeler could become an Aes Sedai if they had the right attitude. No, not really, she shook her head. You also had to demonstrate a level of channeling skill, but it wasn't about strength. In fact, I think the average Aes Sedai now is probably stronger in the power than the average Aes Sedai in my time. Even a very weak channeler could be awarded the title if they could show they had the knowledge and the skill in spinning their webs. She sighed sadly. Of course, I don't suppose there will be any more now, given it's just me left. After a moment, Taija spoke quickly before the encroaching darkness inside her could come too close. Now come on, girls, back to work. The situation in Falme trundled along for over a month before Taija started to feel she needed to move. It was harder and harder for her to keep her mind off things, sitting there acting as a glorified school teacher to Rand and the girls, interspersed with occasional sniping matches with Moiraine. To her surprise, Moiraine turned out to have been pushing Rand to leave Falme. It seemed that she was worried about the local powers moving to crush the latest, false dragon. Somehow Taija found herself sitting in what was essentially a council of war. Moiraine was urging Rand to go Aeolian. To survive and unite the world as the dragon reborn, you need nations behind you. At the moment, every king and queen will oppose you, wherever you go. If we stay here, we will be crushed, so we need to move. She stood, her tone becoming more urgent. You need to go to Aeolian. We have the Horn of Valor, and if you bring it before them, they will rally behind your banner without hesitation. You need an army, and you need a nation behind you if you are to lead the light. Taija wasn't totally sure why Elaine was included in this council. Perhaps Rand asked for her to be. They seemed to have gotten friendlier over the last month. To be fair, the girl was a princess too, so perhaps it was just a rank thing in a feudal society. Regardless, she had her own view. Andor is the largest, most powerful of the nations. It can give you more support than any other, and you yourself are Andoran. While Queen Morghese might not welcome you if you came by yourself, with my support and that of an Aes Sedai, she would throw the power of Andor behind you. Better to rely on the good sense of my mother and our connections to her than a guess about the Horn of Valor. Rand himself preferred to go to Tyr. The prophecies of the dragon say that the dragon will be reborn when the stone of Tyr falls to him, and he wields the sword that cannot be touched. I don't want armies fighting on my behalf. I want the killing and dying to stop, and for that I need to be acknowledged as the dragon reborn, or to find that I'm not. Moiraine and Elaine were both dead set against that, although Moiraine was able to talk over Elaine's protests. How will you be able to take the Stone of Tyr without an army? It is a fortress that has stood since records began. You are the dragon reborn, but that will not protect you if you choose to act like a fool. Rand and Moiraine ended up bickering for a while, with Taija keeping quiet in the background, until eventually Rand turned to her. Taija Sedai, He put some emphasis on your title, and she wondered if he was trying to make a point to Moiraine. What do you think I should do? Taija held up her hands, palms out. I'm sorry, Rand. I don't know your world well enough, and I've never been much of a strategist. Whatever you decide to do, I'll support you in that. Moiraine gave off a vaguely smug feeling at that, although it didn't show on her face. Taija Sedai is correct. You need to listen to the advice of those who know best. I have decades of experience of such matters, and while young Elaine is understandably biased by her relationship to her mother, she also understands the need to establish yourself before you go herring off after the Stone of Tyr. Rand nodded at Moiraine. Nevertheless, I wish to hear Taija Sedai's opinion. Taija paused to think for a few seconds before she spoke. Rand, like I said, I'll support you in whatever choice you make. I don't want you to think that I'll be angry if you ultimately choose a different path to the one I would choose. Her voice was earnest. He needed to understand that she really meant it. That being said, I think Tyr is the best idea for now. I just don't feel as optimistic as Moiraine and Elaine about rulers or nations backing you up, and you'd be putting yourself in a very vulnerable position if things went wrong in Ilion. The Stone of Tyr is meant to be an unbreachable fortress, so I can't see that an army would help with it. She paused. Also, an army would be a target for any of the Forsaken. On the other hand, trying to sneak into the stone might actually work where any army wouldn't. She shrugged, ignoring the look Moiraine was shooting at her. That's what I think for what it's worth. Rand politely thanked Taija everyone else, but it was clear that he wasn't going to be making a decision that night. She could see that Moiraine was annoyed that her advice wasn't being followed as she stalked out shortly afterwards. Taija exchanged a few more words with Rand and the others before heading to her own rooms, Alexei shadowing her. Chapter 39. Interlude X. Tell makes a speech. Chapter text Interlude X. Tell makes a speech. Approximately 3,000 years ago, Tell stood up from his seat in the Grand Council chamber. Columns of white marble surrounded the room, tiered balconies looking down on it. The sun bathed the chamber in naturally colored light through the gigantic stained glass dome that rose above it. The 300 seats of the Grand Council were filled with other Aes Sedai in their official white. Aides and watching Aes Sedai milled around the columns at the edge of the chamber. He took a second to straighten his formal, high-collared coat. Like the others, it was the white of a member of the Grand Council, the symbol of the Aes Sedai prominent on his left breast, sinuously divided circle on a red background. On each collar, he wore a golden circle representing the globe, to show he had earned his third name, something even many of members of the Grand Council couldn't boast. The interlocking blue-red weave of a general wound its way round his cuffs, and he wore the crimson sash of a defender of the light across his chest. He took a deep breath, scanning the viewing galleries on the lowest balcony. There she was. Taija was sitting in the front row, surrounded by other viewers, fidgeting uncomfortably. Her own formal coat black and unadorned other than the badge of the Aes Sedai and golden circles on her collar. As soon as she realized he was looking, she stopped fidgeting and gave him an encouraging smile along with a thumbs up. He knew she hated being here, hated the stiff formal clothes, the politics, brown nosing and manipulation. But he'd also known she'd come to support him. She was very aware of how important this was, to him and to the light. He hadn't asked her, she hadn't said anything, but of course she was there, shifting around trying to make her little-used coat more comfortable when she thought he wasn't looking. It was just what he needed, that little boost as he made his way to the podium, knowing she was there cheering him on. The podium felt like a thin shield against the eyes of the audience when he stood behind it, but he'd prepared, practiced, and rehearsed this speech endlessly. Taija had already told him if she had to hear him recite it again, he was sleeping alone for a week. Taking a deep breath, he began. Friends, companions, comrades, I said, we are losing this war. The shadow seeks to destroy everything we hold dear. Every day thousands of innocents die at the hands of the Forsaken, the Dark One's minions, the disgusting shadow spawn. However, we are stronger than the shadow. The light holds with it the ideals dear to us: peace, democracy, freedom, unity. Together we outnumber the servants of the shadow. We have industrial might, we have population, we have the strength and skill in the power. And yet we are losing this war. Every day the shadows pushes our lines back further. Good people die spitting defiance in the face of the shadow spawn, but nevertheless they die. City after city is lost, their inhabitants enslaved, or worse fed to the Trollocs to fuel the shadow's nightmarish war machine. I ask you why? Why are we losing? The servants of the shadow can barely work together. They will as soon fight each other for scraps of power as work together to defeat us. Those of you that have fought on the front lines, he resisted the urge to scowl at the thought of those who hadn't fought, wouldn't fight, will have seen the way they fail to cooperate. Unity, cooperation, friendship, these are core values of the light. They should be core strengths. Working together, we can shatter the shadow. Logistics, strategy, coordination, these should be our foundation. And yet, he paused and scanned across the room, trying to judge people's reactions. And yet, our forces are uncoordinated, regional fiefdoms answering to individual generals at the whim of local political leaders. Those unlucky enough to be at the front lines fight and die, throwing themselves into the night just to slow the shadow with bravery beyond anything that could be asked of them. And yet the safer regions, those far from the front, hoard resources, dole out reinforcements like the stingiest of misers. They play political games, demanding concessions to do their duty to the world while we fight and die to protect them. Every step we are pushed back makes the shadow stronger and brings more regions into danger. And yet they continue to vacillate. Empty promises are made, but never fulfilled, and all the time we fight and die, watching the shadow extinguish more and more of our cities, our homes, our treasured friends. We spit defiantly into the Dark One's eye, but it feels like we can do little more. Angry rumblings were rising from some parts of the chamber, but Tell continued unperturbed, the webs around the podium letting his voice ring out over any interruptions. People tell me things are changing. They're getting better. Maybe they are. We have appointed a supreme leader of the Light's forces, the Honorable Luz Thurin, the Dragon as he is now known. Our military coordination has improved. He made a sweeping gesture with his hand towards where Luz Thurin sat and gave a small, polite bow in his direction. It should have been him. He knew he'd have done a better job than Luz Thurin, but he could accept it. Luz Thurin had the political power, just as many victories, just a few more accomplishments to his name. He didn't like it. In fact, he'd been furious when it had been announced, but Taija had talked him down. Someone had to be appointed, and there were many who would have been worse than Luz Thurin. He couldn't help but glance towards Latra Parsi sitting in the front row with a scowl of disapproval on her face. If he was fair, and he always tried to be a fair man, Luz Thurin was a good appointment, not as good as he would have been, but a solid choice nonetheless. Have the dragon in control of our forces, and we are able to work together better. Crushing defeats have been inflicted on the shadow through his strategic acumen. He paused, and yet we are still losing. Luz Thurin asks for more resources, asks for what we need to defeat the shadow. But instead of working together to give him what we need, every region tries to hoard what it can for itself, undermining the war effort, consigning their fellow citizens to horrific death. I believe in democracy. I treasure the values of our system. Whatever my opponents say, I am not calling for dictatorial powers to be granted to Luz Thurin or anyone else. However, we are fighting a desperate war for the very survival of our civilization. If we do not win, there will be no system left to protect. That is why I am urging you to vote to grant overriding powers to the Inner Council. Regional authorities must not be allowed to impede the war effort any longer. Our central government is democratically elected. The Inner Council is supervised by the Grand Council. We can allow it to take control for the length of the war. We need it to take control if we want to have anything left by the end of this war. For the good of the light, and for the good of the men, women, and children dying every day at the hands of the shadow. He took a breath. Thank you, honored counselors. He bowed low to the room and returned to his seat to the sound of both applause and angry shouting. It took a while for the chair to bring the chamber back into a semblance of respectful silence, but once he did, Luz Thurin stood to take his own place at the podium, his face expressionless. Tell couldn't help but watch with bated breath as Luz Thurin began to speak, his smooth charisma instantly captivating the room. Honored members of the Grand Council, he began. I thank Tel Janin for his passionate words. He made many valid points in his speech, and we should all consider them. He is right that unity, cooperation, and friendship are true values of the light, and among our greatest strengths. Something was wrong. His words were positive, but the tone. And yet, he dropped the words like a tombstone. Teljanin forgets that democracy and freedom lie at the very core of what we stand for. His proposals for reducing regional autonomy come from his heart, and he is correct that the war requires more from us. I respect his passion. However, his proposals are a recipe for dictatorship. I do not suggest that this is in any way his intention, but we have seen how the shadow will corrupt any system. We need checks and balances to protect the very values we believe in. Otherwise, we walk blindly towards dictatorship and oppression, every small step forward seeming reasonable, until one day we look in the mirror and no longer recognize ourselves, for all we see is the shadow itself. Tell sat there, trying to keep his face neutral as Luz Thurin continued. He thought the man understood, thought he would be one of his strongest supporters, but there was no chance of his proposal passing now, not with Luz Thurin speaking against it. Chapter 40. Informational Taija and the Power. Chapter text potential spoilers on Taija's abilities below. Strength in the power. 4, roughly equivalent to Maghedian in raw strength. Elemental affinities. Strong in spirit, fire, earth, air, weak in water. Strength in elements is of course a bit relative given her overall strength, talents, skills. In terms of her strengths and talents, Taija was never particularly known in the Age of Legends for her channeling. This has been seen already in at least one flashback where she was severely underestimated. Partly that was issues of attitude. She didn't really give off the vibe that most high-tier channelers did. Partly that her professional uses of the power were highly esoteric and more about subtle control than raw power, things like working out better weaves to measure subatomic particles. And partly because she didn't really take part in Aes Sedai politics or networking. She was also a little bit of an oddball. That being said, her strength in the power was pretty significant, even in the Age of Legends when strong channelers were more common. If she was in a room, unless it was in the Hall of Servants, she was probably the strongest one there. Another reason why pre-war she wasn't well known even among channeler fan clubs, because those would absolutely have existed, was a relative lack of flashy talents, capitalized. Because of the obscurity of what she did, and her not being all that public a figure outside academic circles, for most people there wasn't anything they would see that they could mark out as being exceptional about her, other than raw strength, which wasn't on the level of the true powerhouses like Luz Thurin, Barid Bel, or Mirin Iranil. However, like most channelers with her level of strength, she's able to do most things very well, even if she doesn't have a talent allowing her to do more than you would expect with her strength. That doesn't apply to everything, though. For example, an exception to this is healing, where she doesn't have much skill at all, maybe healing a small fracture or cuts bruises at best. She does excel at a few things, arguably unequaled even in her time. In particular, she found it very useful for her career that she had a level of fine-scale control over Sedar that virtually no one could match. She's also exceptionally fast, something that didn't really get noticed until the war because, unless you were a professional power athlete, speed of weaving wasn't all that important. This is probably the other side of the coin for the fine control over her channeling. Her ability to invert multiple, complex weaves at combat speeds is very unusual. Accompanying that is a very strong instinctual understanding of Sedar, combined with a classical AOL education. If she sees a weave, she can probably replicate it and explain it, and there's a decent chance she can tell you exactly how she would improve on it. While she has the general AOL channeler education, she has a very deep knowledge of anything and everything in her professional field, theoretical physics. This can lead to some pretty esoteric weaves, but most of them aren't super useful in a Renaissance society. The need to measure subatomic particles just isn't there. She has made one or two more applied uses of her knowledge so far, though. In general, the most useful thing for this is probably a deep knowledge of metaphysical and physical weirdness. She thought she could work out how the ways were made after a conversation with Loyal. She could absolutely recreate the boar if given the resources, not that she would. She also has the kind of level of general knowledge that you'd expect of an intelligent, highly educated person in a high-tech society.